Your things go away. Just take this out.
Yeah. What are you doing?
Okay, can people hear me?
Yep.
Somebody say yep.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great, thank you.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I called in. This is all I get. I don't think it's gonna. Yep.
Did they have a link for you to?
Yeah, that's what it brought me to.
Well, maybe you need to get out and then write it down, get in again.
I've been trying.
Yeah, well, it's free.
Okay, this is Doug Corrali. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
No echo or anything like that?
Oh, you're fine, Doug. We're working on, we're having some issues with getting some reverb from Wint.
Yes.
So can Wint hear us now? I know we've got Wint on mute for the moment because we're getting...
Can you hear me? This is Wint.
Yes.
Yes.
It
But
sounds
I don't think I have an image.
No, don't worry about that. We'll be.
Oh.
I think what we're going to do is we're going to be viewing the public screen, and we'll be on audio only. Is that correct?
No.
No, that should be correct. Yeah, so you'll be viewing the presenter screen, which is Kathy Howe, and then everyone else should have their video off. There's no need to have video on.
Right.
So,
This is Lucy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
yeah, great.
Okay, good.
Excellent.
Sounds good. Everybody sounds good with no echo.
Yeah, so can people at this, so we're sharing the screen now, right?
Okay.
Can people see the image, the keep calm image?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, this is Wint. I can see that. And I take it that I should now go on mute.
Yep, yeah. So anytime you don't have anything, you don't need to be speaking, good idea to mute yourself and then unmute yourself as you need to talk. That'll prevent feedback.
Good. Okay, I shall do so.
Okay, we're going to start in just a couple minutes. We're just checking to see we can see who's signed in.
Yeah, then Kathy, if you could give me the all clear to start, that would be great.
Do that. Okay, I'm going to put you on mute for just a moment. We'll look at who signed in and
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, this is Jennifer Lemack. I'm on the computer and the phone because our computers here don't have cameras or microphones.
All right, you sound good.
Good.
thank you. We'll start in just a few minutes. We're just checking to see who signed in.
Is it
Okay.
Elliot?
It's Carol Clark. I'm just double checking that my headphone's working.
You sound great.
Okay, good.
One moment, please.
Yeah, everybody's audio is real good.
Hi. Just a quick question. Is there anyone who has called in from their phone rather than having WebEx call into them? There's one user who's a call-in user, and I just wanted to identify them because I can assign them a name appropriately.
I called in. My name's Deborah Kakijian. Yeah, I can't get into the WebEx site from my iPad.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I guess we just found out this doesn't work so well with iPads. Sorry to say.
And could you
Oh,
quickly,
okay.
could you spell your last name for me?
Sure. It's Kahkejian.
Thank you very much.
This is Jennifer Lemack. I called in also.
Yep, I've
Okay, good. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Lucy Waletsky. I also called in, but using WebEx.
Kristen with a K. I don't know her last name.
Karen.
Chris,
Okay,
hi,
gotcha.
hi, Kristen. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
I
sounds
think
good.
they're working. Uh-huh.
Sorry about that. It worked. WebEx worked fine on the iPad last time, but not today.
And we're still waiting, I think, for Jay DiLorenzo.
Has not.
Not signed in yet.
But we have a quorum, so
Okay.
if the chair would like to proceed, we can.
Yeah, well, when I tried signing into WebEx, it took quite a long time for my computer to get to a meeting, so maybe that's what he's struggling with now. But in the interest of time, I think we should call the 181st meeting of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation to order. Today is September 10th. Normally we would be meeting at People's Island, but obviously we're doing this remotely in the age of COVID-19. So the meeting is to order. Before we start anything, I just want to say some thank yous. I want to thank the board for their participation. They're a volunteer group. They're asked to read a lot of nomination forms, and this is an important process and procedure, and I thank the board for their participation. I want to thank Michael Lynch for getting the list of nominations to me on July 29th and for disseminating the nomination forms in a really good and timely fashion so that we have plenty of time to read them. As you may know, I'm trying to get people to sort of divide and conquer filed nomination forms, and we've had some success with that. I also really appreciate the summary that he includes in the email about each form to pique our interest. I want to thank Wint Aldridge for absolutely reading cover to cover every nomination form every time and providing editorial comments to the staff. He deserves a lot of recognition for that. And finally, I want to thank Kristen Herron, Carol Clark, Jennifer Lemack, Wayne Goodman, and Wint Aldridge for agreeing to read very carefully some favorite nominations of theirs in preparation for our meeting today. The next agenda item is the roll call. And Michael, would you do that?
Yes, I'll call the names, and if each of you would briefly describe your background, interest, or role on the board so that our visitors, of which we have many, will know who you are and why you serve on the board.
And
Starting
so
with Doug
Pirelli.
Pirelli.
Roll call the introduction of members.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Doug Pirelli.
I am clinical assistant professor of archaeology at the University of Buffalo and currently serve as chair for the board in my capacity as an archaeologist. I'm also president of the New York Archaeological Council. Appreciate everyone's attention today.
Wint Aldridge.
Wint Aldridge, former Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation at State Parks, and before that, the Historic Preservation Officer at the Environmental Conservation Department, and I guess I qualify as an historian as a member of the board.
Carol Clark.
I'm also a former deputy commissioner at State Parks. I'm a historic preservationist trained at Columbia, where I'm an adjunct professor, and I also teach at Pratt Institute and NYU in preservation.
Thank you. Jay DiLorenzo. Jay?
He's muted.
Are you muted?
Jay seems to have joined. I can see in the chat room, but it doesn't.
We'll come back to Jay. Kristen Herron.
Hi, this is Kristen Herron. I'm Program Director for Architecture and Design and Museums at the New York State Council on the Arts, and I serve as the representative of that agency.
Erica Krieger.
Yes, good morning. I'm Erica Krieger. I'm an Assistant Director for the Variance Unit at the Department of State Division of Building Standards and Codes, and I'm representing Secretary of State.
Jennifer Lemack.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Lemack. I'm the Chief Curator of History at the New York State Museum, and I am on the board representing the Commissioner of Education.
Wayne Goodman.
Good morning, everyone. I am Wayne Goodman. I'm the Executive Director for the Landmark Society of Western New York, based in Rochester.
Lucy Waletsky.
Oh, good morning. I'm Chair of the New York State Council of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation.
Thank you. And I'll go back. Is Jay DiLorenzo on the call?
Yeah, of course I was on mute. Yeah, this is Jay DiLorenzo, President of the Preservation League in New York State. Good morning, everyone.
Paul Stewart indicated in advance that he would not be able to participate, and Chuck Vandry also indicated in advance that he would not be able to participate. Mr. Chairman, we have 9 members of the board in attendance. That represents a quorum.
Thank you, Michael. Moving on to approval of the June minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the June minutes? They have been circulated in draft and final form for our approval. If no one has a comment about the minutes, I will ask for a motion to approve.
This is Kristen,
Jay,
so
I make a
moved.
motion.
Kristen Herron approves. Who was the second?
Jay will second.
Jay was the second. Any objections or abstentions? No. So approved by unanimous consent. Let's move on now to the introduction of any guests. Michael, can you facilitate that in some way?
The guests that we know are on. And if you would like to speak, please unmute your microphone, introduce yourself, and explain if you're interested in any particular nomination. And these are not in alphabetical order. Maureen Marlowe.
Hi, I'm here to support the nomination of the Olmsted Beale House in Staten Island.
Thank you. William Bell.
Good morning. I'm also here to support the Olmsted nomination.
Thank you. Cindy Falk. Matt Shosh. Paige Barnum.
Good morning. I work for State Parks as a Parks and Historic Sites planner, and I'm facilitating the development of the state preservation plan.
Ron Taylor. Deborah, and I'll apologize for not doing your last name justice in advance.
It's Deborah Kakijan, and I'm here to support the Amboy District Number 2 schoolhouse.
Thank you. Dee Dee Petrie.
I'm President and CEO of the National Association for Olmsted Parks, following up on the submission supporting the FLO farmhouse by Olmsted 200.
Thank you. Benjamin Schultz.
Hey, it's actually Jill Teff. Sorry, I'm under my husband's name. I'm here to support the nomination of the Greenwich School District Number 11 nomination.
Thank you. Rich Shear. Rita Carr.
Yes, I'm here to support the nomination of the Pink House in Wellsville, New York.
Are you Mr. Shear?
Correct.
Okay. And Rita Carr? Okay.
We also, Cindy Falk had responded in the chat. She's unable to unmute. They're unable to unmute themselves. They're here for the Hildreth Homestead and the Chenango Canal. We also, in the meanwhile, have had Christina Whiteman join.
Christina Whiteman. Well, thank you all. When the nomination is presented, the guests will be offered an opportunity to speak in support or to comment on the nomination. Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
I really appreciate people's willingness to introduce themselves. I think it dovetails nicely with the board introductions. Moving on to the Deputy Commissioner's report by Daniel McKay.
Good morning, everyone. This is Daniel. I serve as Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation for New York State Parks, and my privilege to work daily with the staff of the Division for Historic Preservation. Kathy, I want to thank you and your staff for yet another full and robust and diverse agenda of nominations for this quarterly meeting. This is our third meeting under COVID conditions. One of the things that we have noticed is that our ability to deliver this program in this sort of electronic format, internet-based format, is sort of extending the reach and participation of these state review boards' work. We're very pleased with that. And we do hope to continue even when COVID restrictions are relaxed and we begin to meet again in person, whenever that may occur. We do hope to supplement our meetings with, this sort of digital outreach so that more public in New York State can participate. But I just want to thank everyone, and James Carter, thank you again for your technical assistance role with this meeting this morning. Just a few agencies' work and the division's work since June. The agency continues to experience record public visitation at our parks and state historic sites. I think in the early days of COVID, the executive staff was quite concerned that a pattern of continued record attendance on an annual basis, over the last few years might finally come to an end. And as it turns out, we are likely to once again set a public attendance record in the New York State Park System this year, which I think is a remarkable testimony to the role and opportunity our park system and historic site system offers the public in New York and other states as an outlet for recreation. And it's been really quite a remarkable year and a great testimony to the New York State Parks Agency staff that work so hard to keep the parks open, historic sites open, and do that safely under COVID precautions. All of our state historic sites are now open for not only grounds visitation, but also visitation to interior spaces. Grants Cottage and Sackett's Harper were the first two to reopen their interior spaces to public visitation back in June, and all of the other sites have followed on sort of on a schedule since. The terms and conditions of reopening historic houses and other interior spaces in our site system has been a highly customized process. Again, site staff and regional directors throughout the system have worked extraordinarily hard to sort of accommodate how we tour and do interpretation at the historic sites respective to COVID precautions and such, but worth noting. Also, earlier in August or last month, the agency dedicated a statue to Sojourner Truth on the west end, the Ulster County end of Walkway over the Hudson State Historic Park. It's a rather extraordinary statue, it is really quite an addition to the state park system, commemorates an extraordinary woman and her personal story and greater cultural influence. And I want to give a shout out to the interpretive staff led by Greg Smith, who formerly headed our interpretive unit, and multiple staff in that unit that did an extraordinary job sort of delivering the final product, the interpretation both on-site and online that has accompanied that statue's installation. In related news, Greg Smith, who has headed the interpretive unit at the Bureau of Historic Sites for a number of years, has now been appointed as Bureau Director, so Bureau of Historic Sites Director, and has stepped into that role. The challenges of that role these last few weeks with great energy and enthusiasm, and we're very pleased to have him really leading the Bureau of Historic Sites and the agency through a transitionary time, new challenges with how we interpret, what we interpret, the digital transitions that we are being asked to undergo, but very pleased that Greg has stepped into that role. On the sort of tech services programming side, our compliance review, we're all still in telework status. We are reoccupying the office on about a 25 to 30% occupancy basis. So staff is rotating through the office pretty much on a weekly basis as needed. So it is nice to see folks in person when we are in, but we haven't assembled the full staff since obviously February or so. The work continues at a high pace. Telework has not diminished our ability to service our programs. The compliance program remains on pace. The tax credit programs, both the homeowner and commercial, state and federal commercial credit programs, it looks like we will secure #1 in the nation status for the commercial program. Once again, about $750 to $800 million worth of commercial tax credit activity in this past federal fiscal year. So September through October 1st through September 30th, we're on pace to be the national leader once again. The summary, we're also at a very interesting benchmark for the federal and state tax credit programs. We have exceeded $7.5 billion in private investment in historic resources, prompted by those programs under Governor Cuomo's terms, 2.5 terms to date, and are at $10 billion in program investment, private program investment, since the state credit was established in 2007. So big numbers. We lead the nation in that regard. Cindy Falk is it's worth noting she is a recent appointee to the National Park Service's National Historic Landmarks Committee. There are several other New Yorkers on that committee. We're very pleased with that. The committee had been in a 3+ year hiatus. It had taken some time for the National Park Service and the current administration in Washington to reappoint the committee that reviews National Historic Landmark nominations. The committee met in late August to hear a number of nominations that have been pending in Washington for 3+ years. There were 2 in New York State. One was the West Point Foundry site down in Cold Spring, a site largely an archaeological site now, but owned by Scenic Hudson Land Trust. That was approved by the committee for elevation to National Historic Landmark status. And then the agency's own Grants Cottage site up in Saratoga County was also elevated to or recommended for National Historic Landmark status. So we were very pleased to see 2 additional sites in New York State elevated to that level of recognition and documentation. I believe New York State leads the nation in the terms of the number of National Historic Landmark designations. And depending on how you count it, New York State Parks has, I think now 44 parks or historic sites that have earned National Historic Landmark status. So that is a very quick summary. So I appreciate Cindy's work on that committee, and Cindy, maybe you'll offer a brief comment later in the agenda about that. Anyway, I continue to thank the staff at the Division for Historic Preservation for handling, continuing to handle the workload, the annual workload. We are meeting our obligations, certainly in that regard, and we have handled a number of special assignments and special requests from other portions of the agency, and I just appreciate the flexibility, adaptability, and commitment to problem solving that the staff at the division continues to demonstrate. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Daniel. Wonderful report, wonderful numbers, the tax credit program. Next, moving to Michael Lynch's director's report.
I have 2 things to report on. I want to give the board an update on our state parks survey. As a reminder, the state parks system celebrates its centennial in 2024. And in preparation for that, we are doing a historic resources survey of all parks and historic sites and other facilities owned and operated by the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. The survey itself is being led by Bill Krattinger. Many of you know him through his work presenting National Register nominations, but this is a special assignment for him. And he's having great success using our mobile application called Trekker 2. It's a field application using an iPad that's geospatially located and downloads or uploads information on the resources. He's completed almost all of the resources in the Saratoga Capital District region of state parks. That includes 10 state parks, 8 historic sites, and 5 boat launches. And at the same time as Bill is looking at built resources, we're also trying to develop a sensitivity map for assessing potential for archaeological sensitivity at our state parks. Mike Schifferle of our Information Resources Unit and Nancy Herder and Andy Farry of our Archaeology Unit are working together on that map. Essentially, the map would be color-coded. Green means no concerns. Yellow means there might be something there, be cautious. And red means it's already known to be sensitive. But we have over 200 state parks and historic sites, so this is a significant effort to try and identify where archaeological resources might be located. This would be both prehistoric as well as historic archaeological resources. One of the things that we like to do is celebrate preservation successes. This sort of fits under that category. The board members may remember that back in March of 2019, Bill Krattinger presented the Winged Foot Golf Course in Maranac for nomination to the National Register at a national level of significance. Bill only got to show you 2-dimensional images, but if you would like to see it in its full glory, the U.S. Open is being held there starting next Thursday, a week from today. You can watch it on TV and see how that Tillinghast masterpiece challenges the best golfers in the world. I'd now like to turn the agenda over to Dan McEnany, who is coordinating our state preservation plan.
Thank you, Michael. We are 8 months into the process of creating the 2021 to 25 State Historic Preservation Plan, which we're required to do by the National Park Service. Because the division also includes our historic site system, gives us an opportunity to also do an assessment and planning for the sites. So we have included that in our plan, though not required. The purpose of this update is really to go through and let you know where we are with our timeline, where we've been in the process. And right now, at this, this 8-month mark, we've gone through, we've done resource assessments, and we're really wrapping up the data collection phase. So to go through, one of the things we talked about was we did a general population survey of 3,500 respondents. We additionally did a colleague survey, which was a little bit more targeted in working with nonprofit colleagues and other groups. We were able to push that survey out to people who had a little bit more familiarity with preservation. What you see here is the actual responses from that colleague survey. You can see an overwhelming amount of responses from Buffalo, which doesn't surprise us because of the great enthusiasm that the city of Buffalo has out there, and big thanks to Preservation Buffalo Niagara for making sure that their region was heard. If you go forward, Kathy. This shows you the actual population percentages in New York, and you can then see sort of the variety in terms of generating these things. With almost half of our population being in New York City, we only got about 12 responses from New York City colleagues, and then 12% from colleagues. Compared to something, when we look at the Hudson Valley, we were pretty thrilled that we were almost right on the mark there. So that gives you an idea of, based on the Regional Economic Development Councils, the results that we're looking at. So the really broad themes when we look at both the 3,500 responses and the 800 responses from preservationists, I think the big thing that struck me as kind of interesting, being involved in the previous plan and looking over a lot of other plans from the states, suddenly there's this great renewed interest in colonial architecture and this big dip in interest in modern architecture, which we had seen as being one of the more identified threat and resources across the state. All regions report on, Main Street and downtowns. We love seeing that historic landscapes are identified, and especially archaeology being a big priority. critical threats, lack of awareness, interest, those things pop up in plans constantly, and that's been pretty consistent. Demolition by neglect is critical upstate, whereas construction pressure downstate seems to be, pretty typical. Visitation, lack of awareness, and their culture or history is not represented. That latter one is sort of interesting as sites and museums everywhere are looking at reinterpretation of their sites. So pleased to see that, because that's something the agency is aggressively working on. Communication across the board at the top of everything, social media. That is the best way to connect to people, to find out about historic sites, preservation, and there are other outlets there. Websites are good and things like that, but really just rising to the top is social media. Topics that are a priority: slavery, abolition, and emancipation, immigration, civil rights, and suffrage. I think that our staff here would give a big cheers to hearing about that. These are the areas that we certainly are most excited about exploring, sort of pulling apart our old nominations and reevaluating the sites in these areas. So that's exciting to see, and you'll see that popping up in the plan. Every plan is always going to talk about lack of funding. Lack of funding, and there's a lot of people who will put out there, we need to know more information about grants. Well, as we know, there are not grants really to rehabilitate buildings for private citizens. There are some things like Save America's Treasure, EPF, of course, through the state, but there's still a belief on a local level that there are grant programs, not tax credit programs. And again, across the board, which is encouraging, no one is saying their community is doing the best at preservation, but everyone would identify sort of when you put everything together that preservation is maturing. The next phase that we did is a little bit more targeted, and some of our board members have participated in this process. This was selecting key groups across the state and asking them, starting with these 6 or 5 key questions, and letting the conversation evolve from there. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you some of the groups that we've been working with. This next one was, this was the area that I worked with, was dealing directly with preservation colleagues. Now for these next few slides, I would ask the board to, I'm not going to read them all, but to go through, see the names that are popping up, and this is the opportunity as we wrap up data collection. If you think or know of somebody in one of these groups that we should have contacted, who you think is going to provide some really textured information for us, please email us. That'd be Paige Barnum and myself, and we would be happy to do further outreach. But these responses they're great, and they're coming from colleagues. They can be frank and blunt, and there are other times that they're expressing frustration, confusion. A lot of it is very COVID-centric. So this has been a great process, and it's been a great tool for us to connect and do further outreach with the office. Next area that Nancy Herter's been looking at is talking to the tribes, nations, and other indigenous groups. This has been sort of a process during COVID of really trying to lock down some of the responses. I think we are still going to be taking responses in from these groups and these TIPOs for quite a while. So I think we've hit maybe 1/3 of these people with confirmed responses, but we'll be doing further outreach there. Next one, this was Fran Stern's area to lead, and I really have to give her a lot of compliment for the work that she's done and the assessment that she's done talking to these groups. It was a really interesting time to talk to people about underrepresented communities, especially in New York, especially during Black Lives Matter. These were wonderful conversations. Talking to Cynthia Houck was just a dream, and we have a lot of information now. Again, I'd ask you to look through some of these groups. We really have tried to look across all of New York State and reach deep so that we're representing everything here. Underrepresented communities, also talking to rural organizations. So this has been really fascinating. I encourage you to please let us know if you think that we're missing somebody who's going to give us great info. Travis has been handling discussions with our New York State historic sites and our friends' sites. Our friends group. So this has been a combination of both talking to site managers and the friends groups that they represent. So moving forward and wrapping up data collection, which could literally go on for years, but we do have a point where we want to get a draft of this in shape by hopefully December. I expect that we'll go a little bit longer, which the Park Service has offered us extensions. What are we looking at now? So one of the requirements of the plan, regardless of what we're hearing, is that we have to do some planning regarding disaster preparedness and resiliency. So that's a new area of engagement that we'll be looking at. We can't get away from this topic. I wouldn't say that based on survey or questionnaires. I would say more with some colleagues groups this came up more often. But there's no way around this in preparing the plan. We have to look at it, and we're looking at it very seriously, so expect us to spend a really good chunk of time in this area. Goal setting. So this has been pretty fun, because really coming out of this with goals and objectives that are meaningful and impactful is really going to set the stage not just for the New York State Historic Preservation Office, but we're trying to communicate to preservation organizations and citizens across the state. So go forward, if you look at it, the last plan, I do think that, to be a little frank, I think we felt that these were pretty generic. There's a lot of objectives that fall under this. I would say that in our assessment to some colleagues, did we achieve some of these broad things? Yes, we did. I think there are things we're proud of, where one of the objectives under these headers was establishing a traditional trades program, which we did, which was not just us, but was adopted by colleagues out in the field doing their own thing with trades. But I think that when we look at it now, we want to get really into the more specific, the specific goal setting and doing a smart evaluation. And this is really where having Paige Barnum's assistance on this plan and her being really one of the chief facilitators of, herding us as a group of cats and getting us to work, to look at exactly what we're doing. And I think we've all seen this kind of smart chart before, so I'm not gonna really go through the whole thing, but laying out those goals and objectives, that will be a really fun and interesting process for us. Next, this is one thing it's not really required, and Michael brought this up, and we all just went through an exercise kind of noodling on what is the difference between State Parks mission, what is the DHP's mission versus what is our vision. And it's been an interesting exercise, and hearing back from people saying, okay, I think I've got the mission, but the vision is really challenging. So in drafting that, we're looking at, a concise statement that answers these three questions. And it's not exactly, easy to do when we have a broader statement there. But when we move into, a mission statement, a vision statement, thank you, moving forward. This is currently, sort of roughly where our mission statement is. Which we think definitely has ways to be a little bit tweaked under the umbrella of, the main parks mission. Looking directly at the vision statement, which we've got something that really Paige targets so well, the ambition. What are our ambitions as an organization? We looked at, our colleagues at the Preservation League, and we looked at their vision statement to just give you a flavor of what they did. We really liked the way that they incorporated a lot of things in there, especially, economic development, community revitalization. Because we've got some really new data right in front of us, we're wondering how this new vision statement is going to say something for our office. It's not a vision statement for all New Yorkers, and this is not a requirement of the plan, but I think Michael really realizing that there was a gap in our office of what's the vision statement we give to our staff when they become onboarded. So this is an exciting phase for us. So that's really, oh, I didn't even see this slide. You can go forward one. This is really where we are in this next phase. So I encourage you to, if there are extra colleague groups that you feel we should be reaching out to let us know. And I can open up the floor now to a few questions that people have about the plan.
Will a draft be released?
Yeah, the plan is to hopefully have a draft around the state review board in December is I think we'd like to show you something a little bit more specific. But I think sending in our actual draft, and you will get a version of that, will be in January.
Dan, this is Wint. I have to say that I was delighted and a little bit surprised that in the general population data statement, there was a high ranking for landscape and farmland preservation. This is something that I think the division has worked on in the past. Some of the proposed rural and landscape districts ran into a little bit of owner and other political problems, but I hope that we don't lose faith in that. And to see so many people identifying that as a high priority is very pleasing, because it can be used to support going forward with some of that documentation and nomination process. Thanks.
Thank you. And completely agree.
Any other comments for Dan on the state preservation plan?
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Matt Schoen out of St. Lawrence County, and I was wondering if you guys had gotten into any communications with organizations in the Adirondacks or along the St. Lawrence River Valley area, because I didn't see any of them in the list.
Yep, we did. Arch, for example, we worked with them, and that's part of the survey outreach response. So if you look at, it's a low number in the North Country of 2.99% of our responses, but outreach through the survey and the 800 responses was done through the North Country. And Arch is one of our key organizations that we work with regularly. If you have a specific group you'd love to recommend that we reach out to, we'd welcome that.
Okay, any follow-up to that? Other questions for Dan?
Go ahead and schedule.
All right. Dan, are you done? We good?
I'm all finished.
Right on schedule, a little bit ahead of schedule here. To move on to the National Register reviews.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, we're going to get started now with the National Register presentations. I wanted to share, first of all, I wanted to thank Virginia Bartos of our staff, who every cycle she puts together the wonderful PowerPoint that you're seeing today. We wanted to include some of the historic photos of some of the houses you'll be viewing. And I also wanted to let you know one of our newest members of our staff, Dan Boggs, is presenting his first 2 nominations later this morning. So welcome to Dan. Dan Boggs joined us right around before the COVID situation, and then we were all sent home. So he's doing a good job here. So welcome Dan Boggs. And I also, before we get started, wanted to share with all of you, I wanted to thank, first of all, Matt Shepard in our GIS unit. He is starting to put together these great maps that show kind of the representation geographically of our various nominations presented. So I would say a pretty good geographic spread here. It's great. We're starting to see some Southern Tier nominations, for example, today, and some activity in the North Country and so on. So pretty well spread out. So we're going to begin with Jem Wachowski up in Erie, starting in our Mother of Good Counsel.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So our Mother of Good Counsel Roman Catholic Church complex, located in the village of Blaisdell in Erie County, is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a representative and intact collection of religious buildings that span nearly 70 years of parish expansion and architectural change. The complex is significant for being one of the most intact representations of a mid-century church complex south of the city of Buffalo. Next slide, please. The primary component, the modernist Gothic Revival style church, was constructed in 1952 and designed by local Hamburg architect Edward A. Pauli. The parochial school was built in 1959 and received a major addition in 1964. The convent, also designed by Pauli, was erected in 1962 and is executed in a modest modern design. A non-historic rectory was added onto the church in 1978, and a parish hall was built onto the north side of the convent in 2019. A non-contributing two-car frame garage is also located on the property. Next slide. Our Mother of Good Counsel was formed in the late 1890s as a mission church established in Blaisdell to meet the demand of Catholics moving into the village for work along the railroads and in the burgeoning steel factories. The parish initially built a combination church and school to make it easier for Blaisdell area Catholics to attend Mass and to provide a parochial education to their children. Although development and population growth waned in the 1930s, the community grew rapidly after World War II, prompting the parish to construct an entirely new and modern campus between 1952 and 1964. Next slide. The buildings that define the parish's mid-century expansion phase blend traditional religious characteristics and iconography with modern forms and materials, exemplifying ideas about teaching and learning that informed the physical design of educational facilities and showcase economy and graceful minimalism in the execution of the residences. Pauli, the architect of the church and convent, had extensive experience designing churches and buildings affiliated with religious organizations, and many of his designs melded traditional themes with modern elements and materials. Next slide. The period of significance for the Our Mother of Good Counsel Roman Catholic Church complex begins with the construction of the earliest building on the site, the church, in 1952, and concludes in 1964 with the construction of a major addition to the school and the death of Reverend Roche, who organized the modernization of the entire complex. This period includes the 1959 construction of the parochial school and the construction of the convent in 1962, encompassing the nominated property's significant building campaigns and the growth of the parish in Blaisdell. So this is Our Mother of Good Counsel Roman Catholic Church complex. Are there any questions on this?
Jan, this is Wint. There was a term used in the nomination, triumphalism, as I guess referring to the attitudes of the diocese in the post-war era. Where did that come from? It seems slightly pejorative. Perhaps wasn't intended to be.
That's a good question, Win. I actually don't have an answer for you that's specific on that term. I'd have to read more carefully in the context and look at how it was used to be able to kind of answer that for you.
Well, it's not a major point, but I'd never run into that term in that context before. Thank you.
Sure, I can get back to you on it.
I would just add that having that map figure 1 early in this nomination was excellent and helped the reader follow through a very detailed and nicely written nomination. Any other questions or comments for Jennifer regarding Our Mother of Good Counsel Roman Catholic Church complex? Do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Erica. I can make that motion.
Erica Krieger moves. Do I have a second?
This is Jay. I can second.
All right. Are there any objections or abstentions? All right. There being none, this nomination is approved by unanimous consent, and we will move on to Niagara Lithography.
Great. Thank you. So the Niagara Lithography Company building, constructed in 1903, is significant for its industrial architecture associated with the once prominent lithography industry in the city of Buffalo. The property is being nominated under Criterion A in the area of industrial history and Criterion C in the area of architecture. Next slide. The building was designed by notable local architects Lansing and Birrell for the Niagara Lithography Company, a company that was nationally renowned for their printing products and technological innovations. This history reveals a series of technological improvements applied to both the production methods and machinery, and these changes can be traced to the structural fabric of the building that remains in the building. The factory's original floor plan, layout, and heavy-duty structural support system addressed needs that were specific to the technical requirements of the lithographic company, with its large-scale, heavy, and vibrating presses providing insight into the architectural needs and history of this industry. Next slide. As the industry changed, the Niagara Lithograph Company applied these changes to its operations, and the building itself absorbed and reflected this history of advancements and improvements. As one of the very few known remaining industrial buildings in the city specifically designed for the lithographic industry from this time, the Niagara Lithograph Company building provides a substantial contribution to the history of this industry and its architectural manifestations during the 20th century. Next slide. The location of the building along Niagara Street was ideal for connecting the building to various transportation networks, including the Erie Canal, adjacent rail lines, and later automobile and truck traffic along Niagara Street. Next slide. The period of significance begins in 1903 and ends in 1967, when the Niagara Lithograph Company consolidated with the Salle Lithograph Company to form Salle Niagara, Inc. This era corresponds to the period during which the Niagara Lithograph Company and the lithography industry itself was at its peak. While the company continued to operate after 1967 until 1992, this period of significance reflects the time when the company was independently owned and operated. By the 1960s, the lithograph industry had converted to more digital and laser cut methods of printing, marking the end of an era for both the Niagara Lithograph Company as well as for earlier analog forms of printing that the company had employed. After remaining vacant for a number of years, the building was rehabilitated in 2018 to 2019 to function, and healthcare-related services on the first floor, and as well as apartments were added to the building. I believe there's also some vacant space that's awaiting some tenant fit out. So this is the Niagara Lithograph Company. Are there any questions on this?
Jen, this is Wind again. I think this is a terrific account of a very important industry, and wonderful that much of the information comes from a personal reminiscence and history of the longtime president of the company. That's got to be something unusual in our work. Nice piece of work. Thank you.
Yeah, the consultant had a really nice history of what lithography was, how it changed. I thought that was really well done. So I'll pass your compliments along to them.
The inclusion of a lot of historic photos of people and context just really allows you to understand the atmosphere of operations. This is a great building, a great adaptive reuse, and a nice nomination. Any other questions or comments about Niagara Lithography Company? Do I have a motion to approve?
Win will make that motion.
I will second the motion and ask if there are any objections or abstentions. There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent, and we'll move on to Lafayette Flats.
Great. Lafayette Flats, constructed in 1897, is significant as a large multi-unit apartment building designed to accommodate the growing middle class in the city during the late 19th century. Organized on a large rectangular site along Lafayette Avenue between Barton Street and Herkimer Street, the 36-unit apartment complex was purpose-built to accommodate a multi-family housing solution in Buffalo's Upper West Side neighborhood at a time of rapid population growth. In anticipation of the need for more housing for the middle class in this northwestern area of the city, the contractors and real estate developers, the Schmidt brothers, purchased the entire lot facing Lafayette Avenue and hired the architecture firm E.P. Brink & Son to design the Lafayette Flats in 1897. The period of significance begins in 1897 with the building's construction and ends in 1939 when the broader historic context of the residential settlement patterns had fully changed the Lafayette Flats to a working-class tenant population due to the predominant trend of middle-class residents moving out of this area and into the suburbs. Next slide. So I just want to take a step back for a moment. When I had actually first toured this building, it was after it had suffered a serious fire because of arson. Most of the upper floor was completely destroyed as the fire had spread through the plenum, which had inadequate fire separation, and the water damage had flooded most of the building. This large and relatively uncommon apartment complex was on the verge of demolition. Thanks to a big local community preservation effort, the building had been saved, rebuilt, and restored using the commercial tax credit program. Next slide. So the Lafayette Flats is significant under criterion A in the area of social history as a reflection of the middle-class residential settlement patterns and development of Buffalo's Upper West Side neighborhood. At the time of its construction in 1897, this block of Lafayette Avenue was sparsely settled. As the streetcar transportation networks encouraged development in the neighborhood, the Lafayette Flats was designed to accommodate new middle-class residents between two busy commercial corridors. For approximately 50 years, this building brought middle-class and upwardly mobile working-class tenants to the neighborhood in large numbers throughout the early to mid-20th century. Next slide. The Lafayette Flats also merits consideration under criterion C in the area of architecture as an uncommon example of a large-scale townhouse-style apartment building with classical revival styling in the city. Designed by E.P. Brink & Son, the building exhibits a repetitive interior plan that reflects an interest in maximizing cost efficiency in its design and construction. This emphasis on affordability was balanced with ornamental details on the exterior, lending a more sophisticated aesthetic approach to this otherwise simplistic design. Classical revival details such as the decorative frieze band, overhanging eaves with brackets, large arches over each of the twin entrances, and three-story hexagonal bays with square columns would have made the repetitive facade reminiscent of a row house typology attractive to middle-class tenants. The number of apartments has not been altered, and the organization of the plan retains a high level of integrity characteristic of this style of apartment building. So this is the Lafayette Flats. Are there any questions?
Yeah, this is Jay. I thought this was a great project. I'd be happy to move it.
This is Wayne. I'd be happy to second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. If I could just draw our attention to figure 4, the ethnic neighborhood map that's included in this nomination. Can you say anything about how that was generated or its relevance overall to the interpretation?
I can't speak specifically about how those maps were generated. I've seen several of them in the city, sort of as an attempt to document where Buffalo is, from its very origins, a city of immigrants. And so there's been these various attempts, especially in the 1920s and 30s, to kind of understand where various ethnic groups and ethnic communities were sort of locating in the city of Buffalo. So I would say that these are broadly representative of the types of people and their origins and where they were settling in the city.
I had no idea there was such a huge swath of Canadians in Buffalo.
Sure, there's a large cultural exchange between Buffalo and Canada. Maybe not at this moment, but in general, yes.
A great building and a great forum. Any other comments? We have a motion and a second. If there are no objections or abstentions, then we approve by unanimous consent and move on to James Finelli in the Amboy District Number 2 Schoolhouse.
Great, thank you.
James, are you able to hear us? I see that you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
All right, James is now muted. And there's a telephone icon next to his name. I don't know if that's an issue.
So the telephone should indicate that he's calling in from a phone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, here you go.
Yes.
Excellent.
I thought I was going to use my phone so you could hear me better because I'm using the state laptop and it's a little echoey. I'm sorry.
Fine.
Can you hear me okay though?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, the audio is good.
Okay. All right, we'll get started then. The Amboy District Number 2 Schoolhouse is a one-story front gabled building located in the East Amboy area of Oswego County. The schoolhouse meets criterion A in the area of education for its association with public education in the town of Amboy prior to school district consolidation in 1963. The schoolhouse also meets criterion C in the area of architecture as an intact and recognizable example of the one-room schoolhouse type common throughout most of the 19th century. It also appears to satisfy criterion consideration B as a moved property that retains integrity of setting. The schoolhouse was moved a quarter mile east to a site adjacent to a farmhouse when State Route 69 was widened in the 1970s. Despite the move, the school retains its spatial relationship with State Route 69, including its historic orientation, setback, and rural location. Next slide, please. And it's just a cute picture of the children in the 1930s. Unfortunately, this is the only historic photo of the building. Next slide, please. Erected in 1895, the one-story schoolhouse is of frame construction and has a rectangular plan with a steeply pitched front gabled roof and a small cupola. The primary south elevation has an offset entry with a single bay gabled roof entry porch. The interior plan of the school is divided into three principal areas: an entry foyer, a classroom, and a storage room, formerly bathrooms. Next slide, please. Interior spaces are characterized by the extensive use of narrow wood beadboard on the ceiling and walls, in addition to floors laid with narrow wood flooring. Next slide, please. School District Number 2 was one of 7 school districts in Amboy in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It evolved from the first school in the town, which was established in 1823. The current building was the third and final schoolhouse constructed to meet the needs of District Number 2 prior to school consolidation. Education in sparsely settled rural school districts such as Amboy centered on a single teacher instructing students either individually or in small groups, while the rest of the class engaged in quiet study at their desks. School architecture reflected this system in its basic design, typified by the one-room schoolhouse. School building guides from the time illustrated standard plans that frequently consisted of a single classroom with windows on 2 or 3 sides. Like many rural school districts throughout New York State, school attendance in the town appears to have been variable. In 1902, for example, school was taught for 150 days with 26 students and with an average daily attendance of 12. After the Second World War, declining school attendance forced the 7 Amboy school districts to dissolve one by one. In 1965, the former School District Number 2 property was turned over to Frank Fassler, who owned land adjacent to the school. In 1969, the New York State Department of Transportation acquired the schoolhouse property as part of the widening and raising of State Route 69. In order to preserve the schoolhouse, the building was moved a quarter mile east to a site adjacent to the Fassler farmhouse, where Fassler was careful to retain the schoolhouse's relationship with State Route 69, including its historic orientation, setback, and rural location. The photo here is actually from the 80s. It shows when the Fassler family used the schoolhouse as an antique shop. I have actually on the phone right now, Deb, forgive me if I butcher your last name, Kakajan. She is part owner of the schoolhouse, and she'd like to say a few words. Deb, you there?
Your list. Thank you. She may be here. Give me just a second. I wonder if she's muted.
That troublesome mute button.
Yeah, she was in before.
I'm gonna manually see if I can unmute Deb.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, great.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. Well, first, I would like to thank James Finelli for his assistance and support with this application. It was great working with him. Basically, I have personal and obviously historical reasons for submitting this application. One is I've always loved the building. And I thought it would be a nice honor for my father-in-law, Frank Fassler, who, even though he had community support, he was the impetus for saving the schoolhouse building and moving it, and paying for the move with his own personal funds. My husband attended the school for a day when he was 4, and later on he did have a gift shop in that schoolhouse as an adult. My husband and I were married on those schoolhouse steps 33 years ago, and our daughter was recently married there just a couple of weeks ago. But on a larger historical context, the building offers a glimpse into the past of rural education, and it is the only other remaining schoolhouse out of all of the districts, except for the Amboy Historical Society, which has had renovations on it, so it's not really historically intact. Recently, our town of Amboy supervisor called and expressed her happiness about the application. And finally, I just wanted to mention that my husband and I have about 1,000 acres here, and it's under conservation easement with the Tug Hill Tomorrow Land Trust, and the schoolhouse is on the conserved property. So we certainly understand the need for conserving land and important historical buildings. So I hope that you can approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
Any comments about Amboy District Number 2 Schoolhouse?
Yep, this is Jennifer Lemack from the museum, and I know this isn't a technical term, but I think this is just about the cutest schoolhouse ever. And
thank you.
And I thought that the application was fantastic because it included the social history along with the building. So the nomination was really great to read and very interesting. So kudos.
Great.
I'd like to give a lot of credit to Deb for the research she did. I asked her a few pointed questions and she gave me like so much information to wade through. So it really made the social history come alive.
Yeah, it was fun to read.
Great.
Do I hear a motion to accept?
I will, Jennifer.
And a second?
Kristen, I'll second.
Great. Any objections or abstentions? All right, there being none, this is approved by unanimous consent, and we move on to West Broadway Commercial Historic District.
Thank you.
Okay, the West Broadway Commercial Historic District, located in the city of Fulton, Oswego County, is significant in association with Criterion A and C in the areas of commerce and architecture. The buildings that collectively comprise the district were, with one exception, constructed in the last quarter of the 19th century, as developers and businessmen recognized the value of establishing commercial ventures in close proximity to a nearby woolen mill. The West Broadway Commercial Historic District comprises the only remaining area of contiguous late 19th and early 20th century commercial architecture in the city of Fulton. The district's buildings all sustained commercial activity during the period of significance, circa 1877 to circa 1960, in addition to secondary functions. Next slide, please. The nominated district's building stock is characteristic of American Main Street commercial architecture built during the late Victorian era, with features that relate them to the Italianate, Queen Anne, and other prevailing contemporary styles. All are of brick construction, which rendered them durable and fireproof. The buildings are all commercial blocks with first floor commercial storefronts and upper floors that were historically given over to domestic or social functions. The first floor is visually distinct and divided from the upper floors by a storefront cornice, below which are recessed entries and large commercial shop windows. Next slide, please. As is typical of many Main Street commercial districts, most of the storefronts were modernized in more recent times or expanded to provide additional interior space. Despite the alterations that have been made to the various storefronts, the upper walls, fenestration, and decorative treatments all remain intact to the period of significance. Next slide, please. The nominated district is located on the west side of the Oswego River in the former village of Oswego Falls, which was annexed into the city of Fulton in 1902. And just a note, this Sanborn map is turned on its side, so north is to the right of the screen. and then the river is on the bottom there. The Oswego River, which flows north from central New York to Lake Ontario, was at one time an important transportation corridor for westward travel. Portage around the falls on the lower east bank triggered early economic development in the area. In 1828, the opening of the Oswego Canal provided an easier route around the falls and further commercial opportunities on the east bank. The name Oswego Falls was used by the growing communities on either side of the waterfall, but in 1835, the east side of the river adopted the name of Fulton. The smaller village of Oswego Falls on the west bank retained its name and separate identity. And just some further comments on this map is you'll notice that at the bottom of the screen along the river is the woolen mill I mentioned earlier, which I'll talk more about in a second. And then because the Sanborn maps are color-coded, the pinkish color being brick, that pretty much represents the existing district. You'll just notice more in the center on either side of West Broadway there between 1st and 2nd Street. You will see a church there. That church, unfortunately, was demolished about 10 years ago. So this district is exclusively a commercial district. Next slide, please. The biggest factor in the growth of Oswego Falls and its West Broadway commercial district was the American Woolen Company. This was the largest manufacturing center in Oswego Falls and later in the combined city of Fulton. The first building of the mill complex was constructed in 1859. By the turn of the century, the mill employed approximately 1,000 workers. Among other products, the local mill produced uniform material for soldiers fighting in the Civil War, Spanish-American War, and both World Wars. It continued to employ nearly 1,000 people through the early 1950s before finally closing in 1956. Unfortunately, today, only a fragment of the mill complex remains. In the 1870s, the woolen mill owned the land north and south of Broadway. Sale of that land led to commercial development on Broadway between 1st and 2nd Streets, with the south side developing earlier than the north side. The earliest buildings in the district date to circa 1877, while the most recent was built in 1901. The majority were constructed in the 1880s. The district is comprised of a coherent group of brick buildings that portray the commercial development of this part of Fulton beginning in the late quarter of the 19th century. I'd like to note that this nomination was really pushed by the business owners themselves, almost to a property owner. They've been big supporters of this, really pushing this for some time, and got the Historical Society for Fulton, the Friends of History in Fulton, to sponsor it. And they hope to, once it's listed, if it becomes listed, to apply for commercial tax credits for their businesses. Does anyone have any questions about this one?
No,
Okay.
this is Jennifer Lemack again. This was the other nomination that I was supposed to comment on, and I thought you did a really good job. And I really liked the individual building histories. So well done.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, James. Any other comments about the commercial HD Fulton? Do I hear a motion to accept? Here's Stephen Schubert. Could that person mute their?
All right, thank you. So we're going to go on to the next one.
Whoa. We have not voted on the previous one.
Oh, I apologize.
I need a motion to accept the West Broadway Commercial Historic District.
I will. This is Jennifer again.
Do I have a second?
This is Wayne. I'll second it.
Are there any objections or abstentions? If not, it is approved by unanimous consent, and we may now move to the Foster Hubbard House.
All right, thank you. The Foster Hubbard House, located on West Onondaga Street in the city of Syracuse, Onondaga County, is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture, as a largely intact and representative example of Italian-style domestic architecture erected in the immediate post-Civil War period, and as a representation of the work of architect Simon de Graaf. It is the last of 3 identical houses de Graaf designed and built for himself and his 2 daughters on adjacent lots on West Onondaga Street. These houses at one time served as visible expressions of de Graaf's generosity to his family and his architectural skill, and they helped to shape local tastes in fashionable architecture along West Onondaga Street as it developed as a grand avenue. Next slide, please. Built in 1867, it is a 2 1/2 story brick masonry building with a rear wing and is of distinctive Italianate style design. It consists of the cubic mast main block and a 2-story rectangular plan rear wing, both with shallow hipped roofs with wide overhanging eaves and paired eave brackets. The roof of the main block is surmounted by a square-shaped cupola terminated by a dome and a decorative finial. The foundation consists of quarry-faced ashlar with a dressed stone water table above. The original entrance has paired glazed and paneled doors shielded by a turn of the 20th century porch that has Tuscan order columns supporting a low hipped roof with which extends along part of the west elevation. The fenestration is symmetrically arranged on the principal elevation, which is distinguished by a projecting central bay accommodating the entrance at the first story level. Next slide, please. The interior retains the original floor plan and historic features that include a curving staircase, wood flooring, and wainscot, plaster on lath walls, extensive moldings, and paneled wood window aprons. The historic plan remains largely intact, excepting for reversible alterations made to room configuration to accommodate non-domestic functions in more recent times. Next slide, please. There are some more images of the interior. During the last decade of the 19th century, West Onondaga Street developed as a premier Syracuse residential enclave, distinguished by grand houses beautified by large lawns and shade trees along both sides of the street. The nominated house was one of many that once lined the street and proclaimed the collective wealth, status, and mindset of the residents who resided there, many of whom ranked among Syracuse's most prominent professionals, politicians, and businessmen. Next slide, please. Simon de Graaf, who noted himself as an architect in his 1854 publication, The Modern Geometrical Stair Builder's Guide, built the nominated brick house for his daughter, Mary, and her husband, Myron Foster. De Graaf built a second brick house for himself on a slightly larger lot west of the first house, and a third for his daughter, Jane Amanda McCracken, and her husband, William. All three houses were of similar design and were described in an 1867 account in the Syracuse Journal as his three large first-class brick houses. De Graaf's West Onondaga Street houses included the major hallmarks of the Italian style, and they relate the house to the cubic mass type with cupola that was popularized by Andrew Jackson Downing and Samuel Sloan in the 1850s, and which became a patent form in central New York by the 1860s. The style continued to flourish in the 1860s and 1870s, though by the latter period, detailing had become more robust and ornate. The nominated house, while rooted to some extent in the earlier period, nevertheless exhibits this increased enthusiasm for ornamental treatments, as seen in features such as the brick corbelling, heavy rounded moldings, and elaborated staircase details. Now, this property, I'd like to note, is owned by the County Land Bank. What they're hoping to do is to list this property so that they could potentially sell it to someone who wants to rehab it and take advantage of the commercial tax credit. I have a letter of support from the city of Syracuse from the Preservation Board. Any questions on this one?
How unusual is that process for the municipality to do the registry before trying to sell the house to somebody who would be interested in renovating it?
Yeah, that is perhaps a little bit unusual, at least in my experience. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that.
This is Virginia. It's the Syracuse Land Bank, and we've actually had other properties owned by the Land Bank come before the State Review Board. They try and acquire them. I think it's mostly to keep them from demolition while they search for an owner to take over the building and use tax credits and other means to save these properties and put them back into use.
Well, that's wonderful. I wish they did more of that in Buffalo, I have to say. Other questions or comments about the Foster Hubbard House?
This is Wint. I think that de Graaf's role in the building of iron bridges and then in the iron industry generally suggests that somebody ought to dig further into that record, because he sounds like a most interesting and pioneering figure in those fields.
Thank you, Wynn. Any other comments or a motion to approve? Well, I'll move it. Can I have a second?
This is Jay. I'll second.
This is Erica. I can oh, sorry.
Jay beat you to it. Jay DiLorenzo has a second on this one. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent, and we can move on to the Oneida Community Limited Administration Building.
The Oneida Community Limited Administration Building, located in the city of Oneida in Madison County, is significant under Criterion A in the areas of commerce and social history for its association with the nationally prominent Oneida Community Limited Company, an international manufacturer of silverware, cutlery, and other tableware. Oneida Community Limited, later Oneida Limited, was the outgrowth of the Oneida Community, a 19th century utopian religious group that transformed itself into a joint stock company in 1880. In addition, the Oneida Community Limited Administration Building is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture, as a noteworthy example of early 20th century collegiate Gothic style architecture, in this instance employed for a company's administrative headquarters. Initially constructed in 1926 to the designs of architect Albert Leverett Brockway, the building housed all aspects of the company's functions except production, including the legal department complete with law library, marketing with photography studio and darkroom, and presentation with a room designed solely to display Oneida products to potential buyers. Next slide, please. The administration building is a two-story steel-framed building clad in limestone with cast stone trim and was erected on a rectangular plan. Interior treatments, where they remain intact, include the extensive use of quarter-sawn oak in principal spaces and characteristic Gothic-inspired features. Next slide, please. And here's another view of the main block of the building. Next slide. As the company grew and became more prosperous, additional space became necessary to accommodate it, and subsequently 2 additions were added in 1948 and 1965, which you can see in these photos. Both were designed by the architectural firm of King & King of Syracuse. Next slide, please. And here are some interiors. This is the main lobby. So you can see the quarter-sawn oak there. Next slide, please. And then this is a boardroom, but this is also still in the main block of the Gothic building. Next slide. And then this is a auditorium in one of the portions of the addition. So this is mid-century. Next slide, please. The Oneida Community Limited was the extension of all the industries undertaken by the Oneida Community. Community is one of the only communal groups to sustain itself through manufacturing, selling fruit preserves, and silk from the beginning. Silverware production began in 1877. However, their most successful business endeavor was manufacturing and selling animal traps. The traps were sold throughout the United States, Canada, and South America, even Russia and Australia. The Oneida Community Limited came into existence on New Year's Day, 1881. The first 15 years of Oneida Community Limited were rocky. Business decisions were often secondary to social concerns relating to the former community members. Everything changed when 23-year-old Pierpont Bert Noyes returned to Oneida in January of 1894. Noyes, a child of the community, had been educated at Colgate and Harvard universities. His experience working for the company in New York City, as well as experience running his own company, allowed him to see the problems that threatened the company's existence. B.B. Noyes eventually took full control as president of Oneida Community Limited, bringing in his own team of trusted advisors to run the company. Most of these were fellow children of the community who left to attend college and find their own careers. Noyes, realizing that further growth of the animal trap business was limited, decided that the company should focus on silverware. The next slide, please. Oneida Community Limited did not abandon its communal ideals as a joint stock company. B.B. Noyes instituted a policy to cap executive salaries at a very low level and reduced management salaries when the company was having financial difficulties. The company paid higher than average wages, shared company profits, and helped employees build houses in the neighboring city of Sherrill. In 1926, B.B. Noyes and the board decided to construct a new administration building that accurately conveyed the financial and social success of the company. They chose Syracuse, New York architect Albert L. Brockway to design it. The new building demonstrated the success of the company's progressive labor relations by including the name of every employee within its cornerstone. This building actually is coming in for tax credits. It has an approved Part 1, and it's going through the Part 2 process right now. Does anyone have any questions on this one?
Thank you, James. That's a really, really nice nomination and a great building. Questions or comments about Oneida Community Limited Administration Building?
This is Wind. I think that the story of what they call charitable capitalism is wonderful, and its origins in a rather unusual religious organization makes it a tremendously interesting story, since it became a very successful business, and I'd be happy to move it.
Thank you, Wynn. Do I hear a second?
This is Carol. I'll second it.
Do I hear any objections or abstentions from the board? There being none, we declare this approved by unanimous consent and move on to Virginia Bartos in the Hannah and George W. Jones House.
Just a reminder that I currently cover the Finger Lakes, but I have a few leftovers from Central New York, hence my first presentation being the George and Hannah W. Jones House in Ovid, Seneca County. And I'm kind of glad that we didn't put the Foster Hubbard House and this one back to back. Anyway, located on the south end of Main Street, the house is significant under Criterion C for its architecture as an outstanding example of an architect-designed 1870s Italianate residence in the village of Ovid. As stated in the nomination, the building displays the classic block form of mid-19th century Italianate design with a slightly hipped roof and centrally placed cupola. The building was the work of architect and builder Jacob Allington, who had a long career, and most of his extant work is in Penn Yan and Elmira, so this adds Ovid to the list. Allington's initial training as a carpenter is quite evident with the amount of detail and woodwork in and on the building, especially on the facade. Next slide, please. The house was completed in 1873 for Hannah and George Jones, seen in the circa 1880 photograph with the couple in the lower left, and presumably their adopted daughter Elizabeth with her arms crossed to the right. George purchased his father-in-law's failing mill, and after it burned down in the 1860s, he rebuilt it and turned it into a thriving operation. His brother joined the operation, and together the Jones Brothers Mill became important to the local farming community for milling their grain and sawing lumber. George was also a member of the board of the Willard Asylum and served one term as a New York State Assemblyman beginning in 1884. In 1951, the house became a funeral home, and in 1991, it became a bed and breakfast, which it still is at present. Next slide. This slide shows the north elevation of the building in the upper photo, the south elevation below it, and the existing garage to the right. The images of the house show the telescoping blocks, first-story bay windows, and rear porches along with deep eaves and paired brackets. The Jones Brothers Mill was quite successful, as this house can attest to, being large and highly detailed and on a sizable village plot that was within walking distance to the mill. It probably didn't help that it probably helped that they also milled lumber at the mill. A barn was built roughly around the same time as the house. An arson fire in the 1890s slightly damaged it, and the building was completely renovated after 1951 as a garage for the Coryell Funeral Home's ambulance service. Next slide, please. The interior of the house is highly intact, with the floor plan unchanged and much extant historic fabric. Here we see the main hall on the left, the main parlor in the upper image, and the dining room below. Rooms share features such as wood floors, doors, windows, and wood trim. The dining room was recently restored, and photos of the work are on the B&B's website if you're interested. Decorative arches are seen in the main rooms, which was a nice repeated detail employed by Allington. Next slide, please. The decorative arch makes an appearance in the second floor sitting area as well. The upper floors contain the bedrooms, one of them rumored for a long time as being used by Theodore Roosevelt when he was an overnight guest of the Joneses. Additional research has documented that a young Teddy Roosevelt did indeed visit Ovid in 1883 to enlist Jones's support for running for Speaker of the Assembly when the session began the next year. George invited him to spend the night before continuing on his journey through the state. Just as a side note, Roosevelt was not elected Speaker, but at least he got to meet a freshman Republican assemblyman. The sponsor of the nomination is the owner, who also provided much of the research and is looking for recognition for the house. As previously stated, the house was a funeral home for a long period, and the goal is to restore the community's association of the house with Hannah and George Jones and some of its forgotten history. Comments or questions?
Hey, this is Wayne Goodman. I just wanted to say this is one of the applications that I took a closer look at. I thought that this was extremely interesting to read. I particularly appreciated the description and the connection between Andrew Jackson Downing's publications and sort of the melding, if you will, between the federal style and this great Italianate style. So good job. Nice application.
Thank you, Wayne. And Virginia, any other comments about the George and Hannah W. Jones house?
This is Wint. Virginia, the cupola, is it typical on houses like this that the cupola illuminates the whole staircase, or is it just something that puts light in the attic?
You could actually go into this cupola. There is an enclosed staircase that goes from the second floor through the attic to this. And I don't think that the owner uses it. And I know that she did tell me that the finial that was on the cupola is now stored in the barn, and they're hoping to someday to be able to put it back on top of the building.
This is Michael Lynch. I will also add that before the invention of air conditioning, the ability to open those windows and create a vertical airflow through the open windows on the lower floors up through the central corridor tended to cool the house, so it had a function.
Very interesting. Thank you.
If there are no other comments, do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Wayne Goodman. I make the motion.
And a second?
This is Kristen. I second.
Kristen jumped in first and led it, so she gets it. Are there any objections or abstentions?
Doug was the second, Kristen?
Yes. And this is approved by unanimous consent, and we move on to George and Edison Wheeler House. Boundary increase.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. My next presentation regards, sorry? Yep. Okay, my next presentation regards the George and Addison Wheeler House in the East Bloomfield vicinity, Ontario County, that was listed on the state and national registers in 2005. Just to recap, whenever a listed property changes the boundary, the board is required to approve the change. In this case, the current owners would like to add a recently acquired parcel of roughly 2 acres that has a historic Wheeler family barn. The barn needs work, and they would like to take advantage of the state barn tax credit. The slide shows the listed boundary in blue. That was roughly 110 acres. The new proposed boundary is in red with the new parcel circled. This was not originally included in the 2005 listing, partly due to the parcel and barn being under different ownership at the time. And my guess is that it may have been overlooked as being part of the historic Wheeler farm due to its location, which is across the road. Next slide. The boundary increase also allowed for adding missing information to the listing. As stated in the document you received, a family cemetery and barn east of the Greek Revival House were included in the listing's resource count, but not described in the nomination. Brief descriptions of each are part of the amendment, along with the description of the barn on the north side of the road on the added parcel. Information about the house and its architecture is still relevant, as the recent image of the house attests to its current state. So that information did not require amending. Next slide. The 2005 nomination stated that the Wheeler House was also significant under Criterion A for agriculture as part of a working farm in agrarian Ontario County, but failed to include a narrative related to Criterion A. The document you received includes a brief discussion about 19th century agriculture in Ontario County and in East Bloomfield, and how grain was a major crop well into the 20th century. Photo documentation provided evidence that the Wheelers grew grain along with the surviving barns on the property. The barn being added to the nomination, seen in the upper image, functioned as hay and grain storage in the upper portion and for sheltering livestock in the lower section. The goal of this document is to justify the boundary increase by providing evidence that the parcel and barn were part of the Wheelers' original holdings. The added benefit is the opportunity to add information to the 2005 listing. Any questions or comments?
Hi, this is Wayne. I was just going to comment that I think it's just a really positive and certainly logical to finally reunite these two parcels. And plus, looking at the condition of the barn, it's wonderful to hear that the owners would take advantage of the tax credit program and rehabilitate the barn. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Virginia. Other comments or questions? Do we hear a motion to approve?
I'll move. It's Erica.
Erica moves. Second? I'll second it. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent, and we move on to Kathleen Frank and the Frederick Law Homestead Senior Farmhouse.
Good morning, everyone. This is the Frederick Law Olmsted Senior Farmhouse on Staten Island in Richmond County, and I just want to give you a few facts before I present it. The sponsor of this nomination is the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and the purpose is to apply for an EPF grant. And I have 7 letters of support, one from the owner, well, it's not here yet, but it's promised, from New York City Parks. And I have a letter of support, it's a CLG, so I have a letter of support from LPC. I have a letter of support from the Friends of the Olmsted Beale House, from Justin Martin, who is an architect who wrote a book on Olmsted and who is on the advisory board of the Olmsted Beale House. I have a lovely letter that I think you got from 3 sisters who lived in the Beale House growing up in the 50s and 60s. I have another letter from 2 historians who are also friends of the Beale House. And then late last night, I received a very nice letter from Senator Andrew Lanza, who says that he helped City Parks to acquire the building, which is lovely, and he's a huge supporter. And then on the line, I have William Bell, who introduced himself. He's vice president of the Friends of the Olmsted Beale House. And Bill has been tremendously supportive and helpful to me over the last month or so. And I believe that Bill would like to speak after the presentation, and then he'll introduce anyone else who wants to speak from the Friends group. And this is significant under 2 criteria. B, for association with Olmsted in the period 1848 to 1855 under social history and literature, and C, for architecture in the period circa 1720 to 1855 in architecture. So here we go. In 1848, when Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. was 26 years old, a somewhat romantic and restless youth with only the admirable goal of becoming a scientific farmer, his father bought him a farm on Staten Island. It was the second farm in as many years, the first one in Connecticut not quite working out, and this time his father reminded him that the farm would require his close and undivided personal attention. noting his expectation that no extraneous or unimportant matter will take up your mind and time. The next slide, Kathy. And you can see Olmsted's 130-acre farm in the center of the map. It's just to the right of the large S. His name is on it. It was beautifully sited on the south shore of the island in the neighborhood of Eltingville. And the farmhouse itself occupied a natural bluff above Raritan Bay with extensive views to the south and east. Now, the farm had been acquired from a Dr. Ackerley, who had himself purchased it as a retirement property, and he had updated and enlarged a settlement period house for his own use in 1839. Next slide, please. Next, Kathy. Okay, this is Olmsted's sketch of the farmhouse. It was done about 1848, shortly after his arrival. Based on the date of this sketch, all the letters, documents, and recollections that I could find, and the fact that Olmsted never again mentioned altering it, we believe that this drawing represents the farmhouse as Olmsted found it and as he lived in it for the next 7 years, which would prove to be a transformative period in his life. He did discuss moving the barn and outbuildings, adding a number of plantings, specimen trees, planting crops, and starting a nursery, all of which occurred fairly early in his tenure, and none of which survived, with the possible exception of a few trees around the house. And I just learned last night that LPC is actually doing a cultural landscape report to see what evidence there might be for anything that Olmsted actually did on the site, to see if anything survives. So we'll have a better idea of that after that landscape report is completed. So though somewhat successful as a farmer, within 2 years, Olmsted was again restless and had the opportunity to travel to Europe. So passionate was his desire to go that, asking his father for funds, he said that, well, if it came to it, he would sell the farm to get the money. So his father covered the trip, and Olmsted did return to the farm, where he continued to live until 1855. However, the trip sparked a period of intellectual growth that marked Olmsted's transition to a new vocation as an influential critic and writer, and set him on the path towards his life's work. For the rest of his tenure on the farm, Olmsted was primarily occupied with reading, traveling, intellectual discussions, and writing. So let's take a look at the house today. Kathy, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Now, unfortunately, intensive 20th century suburban development has completely eradicated the farmland and isolated the poorhouse, which is now landlocked on a small 1.5-acre city park with no views of anything at all. Although somewhat deteriorated, though, the house actually retains a good deal of integrity to Olmsted's period. This is the facade, or the east elevation. And of course, the major loss to the exterior of the house is the wraparound porch, which was present from the 1830s until, I think, the mid-20th century. Now, the house itself has a long and complicated story. At least a portion of it is said to date to the early 17th century. But the part that's recognizable dates to a century later, when the building was described as a 1.5-story stone farmhouse with a porch along the east elevation. And the first story of the house that survives dates to that period. And this is where I would normally be jumping up with the pointer, and I don't know if you can see them, but there are round arches over the entrance and between each of the first story windows. And we think that those provide some evidence of that early farmhouse. The second important stage occurred after it was purchased in 1839 by Dr. Ackerley. Dr. Ackerley raised it 1.5 stories, added the large porch, and he probably added the kitchen wing. And he reconfigured it into the 5-bay center hall plan house with Greek Revival motifs, which is what the house looked like when Olmsted lived there, and pretty much what survives today. So we'll go around the house. Kathy, could we have the next slide? So this is 2 slides going around the north elevation, going around to the west. That's the kitchen wing there. And notice that the upper story wall here is brick. I don't know why. On the south end, it's wood. The next slide, please. This is the rear elevation, or the west. It's basically identical to the front, except that it has fewer openings on the first level. We don't have a view of the south elevation, but the house was built into the hillside so that the south end drops off, and there was an entrance to the basement that can be seen in the historic photographs. Next. Okay, the interior is a simple plan defined by a center hall flanked by 2 rooms of equal size. The photographer here is actually standing in the living room because the wall dividing the hall from the living room is missing. However, the dividing line is still evident in the floor. Now, the next slide. Okay, so on these 2 slides, looking toward the living room, each of the downstairs rooms has a chimney on its end wall. And if you, in the right, you can see that chimney missing its mantle. But if on the left-hand side, you can see the windows, and they still have their Greek Revival paneling. So on the next slide, okay, this is the dining room on the other side of the hall. It still retains its mid-century mantle intact, and the door to the right of that is the entrance to the kitchen wing. And then on the slide on the bottom, the door that you see on the left provided the entrance to the hall. It's a little rough, but if you look carefully, you'll see that most of the trim that survives is really from that mid-century Greek Revival period. So upstairs, in the next slide, there's a transverse hall that connects the bedrooms. Each end of the house has a chimney, and there are built-ins marking the transition between the stone and the frame parts of the house. Olmsted widow actually recalled the built-in cabinets in a recollection that she wrote near the end of her life. She thought them odd but useful. And each end has its mid-century mantle, and the cabinets throughout survive. The next slide. So on the 3rd floor, the bedrooms have full-size windows on the end elevations and frieze windows on the side. And then finally, the last slide is from the 1930s. And I chose this one because it was closest to the view as Olmsted sketched it. It's basically the same, except for the updated porch. Now, despite fairly recent deterioration, the farmhouse retains sufficient integrity to illustrate its long history. It's locally significant in architecture as a typical example of how settlement period houses on Long Island were transformed into farmhouses and second homes over time, especially as transportation to New York City became easier. I did a little survey of the houses we've listed on Long Island from the 18th century, and they all pretty much had these types of additions. But the house is nationally significant for its association with Olmsted during a seminal period of his life. The significance of this period is not related to the design or practice of landscape architecture. For Olmsted, these years were marked by travel, observations, reading, and writing, as well as meeting important professional contacts and engaging in stimulating discussion with leading influentials. We know from his letters and published works that in this period, Olmsted honed his personal theories about democracy and explored ideas about the restorative properties of nature and the value of public parks. Here, Olmsted began to develop a mature social conscience, formulate ideas linking nature to public welfare, recognize the obligation of government to provide public parkland, especially in urban areas, and become an influential social thinker and critic, disseminating his ideas widely in newspaper articles and 3 major books, all written here. He also became a strong and vocal advocate against slavery. During this period, his ambition to become useful in society expanded from the scale of creating one socially progressive farm to ideas and theories about creating parks and park systems that serve large segments of society. It was also in this period that Olmsted fully embraced the social aims of landscape design, that beyond providing pleasing scenic effects, public landscapes were essential in promoting the health, welfare, and the comfort of citizens, all of which he wrote about in his letters, articles, and books. By the time he moved to Manhattan in 1855, Olmsted was on the verge of an important career writing about and influencing public policy and manipulating vast tracts of land for the public benefit. This short, though crucial period in his life set the course of his life work and inspired some of his significant contributions to American society. And this is the only resource that represents this important period of Olmsted's life. Any questions about the Olmsted farmhouse? This is one of the most interesting and challenging resources I've worked on, partly because I could not kidnap Bill Krattinger and go see it and tear it apart.
This is Wind. Well done, Kath. that final summary of the importance of this protean figure in our cultural history is very well expressed. And anything to do with Olmsted, especially something as significant as this home was for him as he moved through the early mental process to emerge within just a year or so as one of the great figures in our national life is tremendously exciting. It is certainly deserving of national significance. Wouldn't be surprised if eventually it became an NHL. I really don't have anything more to add. It's a pleasure to have read about it. And I look forward to a time when it's going to be a place visited by a great many people when it's restored and made more accessible to the general public. Thanks. And
Thank
I
you,
would
Wayne.
move,
Thank you very much.
I'd move its approval too when we get to
Well, I
that
think
point.
yeah, okay, well, thank you.
Kath, this is Daniel Daniel McKay. You took on quite an assignment in this one. I appreciate your attention to both expediency and detail in getting this nomination across the finish line. And I'm so pleased that you have presumably positioned this site to get state funding in the future. So thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. I guess I'll just add that I was very surprised to find out that in his early life, Olmsted was primarily concerned with falling in love with most of the young ladies he came in contact with. That's a lot of his early letters were filled with that. He was quite the aimless youth.
Nice.
So this was really an important period in his life. Thank you, Daniel. I really enjoyed working on it, but it was a challenge.
And we have a guest who wants to speak on this.
At least one. Bill? William Bell? Are you still here?
Yep, he's currently muted. I'll try to force
Okay,
unmute.
unmute him. I know he wanted to speak. There are some other Olmsted people on the line too. I don't know if they all want to speak.
Well, this is Bill Bell. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there are 2 or 3 other members of our board, the Friends of Olmsted Beal House, Jeffrey Tandol and Maureen Marlowe on the call. And I just want to personally thank Kathleen, and Glenn Umberger of the Landmarks Conservancy for putting forth this application and inviting us to participate and support it. But I think Eileen Monreal, who is the president of the Friends of Olmsted Beal House, has some remarks that she would like to make. So I'll turn it over to her. Thank you.
She can't unmute. James, can you unmute her?
Yep, I'm looking for Eileen in the list right now. Give me a second. Eileen should be unmuted, so we should be able to hear her.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I assume everyone can hear me now? Yes?
You're a little grainy. You're
Okay.
a little bit of a problem, but we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Well, good morning, Deputy Commissioner McKay and members of the board. My name is Eileen Monreale, president of Friends of Olmsted Beal House in Staten Island. As you know, we have submitted several letters from members of our board and advisory board, 3 landscape architects, 2 local public historians, an Olmsted biographer, and the daughters of Carlton and Louise Beal. The Beals were the last private owners of the house, and they grew up in the house. I'm here, and the letters submitted were in support of the application prepared by Mr. Umberger of the New York Landmarks Conservancy and the historic preservation staff to have the Frederick Law Olmsted Senior Farmhouse placed on the New York State and National Registers of Historic Places. The house stands like an embodiment of the history and development of Staten Island, from a simple stone-walled room, later enlarged to a bigger house, to a building 2.5 stories on a wooded knoll, to a summer retreat for residents escaping the city. Fortunately, it escaped the last phase of change on Staten Island, its emergence as the suburb of the city within the city. It's a monument to all the changes and the history of not only Staten Island, but New York City and even the country since it was first constructed in the late 1600s. Presently on the property, but more so during the time that Olmsted called it home in the 1850s, when you could stand on the porch of the house, you could see the curving drive, the hills and ponds, the land falling away to the waters of Raritan Bay. These all played a pivotal role in the formation and ideas and ideals Olmsted later employed in the green spaces he created. This house is the place that gave us all so many other wonderful places. It certainly merits recognition on the Register of Historic Places. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just like to thank you, whoever got the letters from the Beale sisters, because we really enjoyed reading their personal reminiscences of growing up in the house.
That thank you goes to William Bell. He was wonderful in pushing us all towards compiling letters, and we thank you very much, Bill. And thank you, Ms. LeFranc.
Thank you.
All right, I'd be very happy to second Wynn's motion and ask if there are any objections or abstentions for this nomination.
This is Dee Dee Petri from the National Association of Olmsted Parks. I simply wanted to confirm that the Olmsted 200 letter in support of the nomination was received.
I don't think so. How did you email it? It's certainly not too late at all.
It was emailed to Mr. McKay, and it represents the support of 8 national organizations. So I wanted to make certain that you received
I did not get it, but certainly it could have. It's not a problem. Thank you for bringing it up. It'll certainly, you're well in advance of when we would be mailing this to the Park Service, so it will certainly go with the nomination.
All right.
If we didn't get it, send it to Mr. Bell, and he can send it right to me when I'm assembling the package. I'll put it in there. No, that's terrific. Thank you so much for that. I've had wonderful letters of support from this on this one, more than I usually get. So.
Yeah, thanks.
And this is Daniel McKay, and I do apologize. We are in receipt of your letter, so it is here. No further action is necessary.
Okay. Okay.
I apologize for not acknowledging that to you. I think I looked at it on my phone and not from my desk. So I will forward this to Kath, and this will join the nomination materials going down to DC.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that.
And there's
very
still
much.
time. There's still time to send letters, and even after, it won't go in for a while, and because I have to put the whole package together. And I just got some pictures from William Bell yesterday that I want to include, that I think show the Olmsted trees. And even after it goes to Washington, you can still submit them up till the day it's listed. So there's plenty of time if anyone else wants to submit a letter.
All right. Well, thank
I
you.
really appreciate the support. Thank you very much.
All right, an opportunity to object or abstain. There being none, it's approved by unanimous consent, and we move on to Jennifer Betzworth and Rhinebeck.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So we'll get started here with Rhinebeck. The Rhinebeck Village Historic District was listed on the National Register in 1979 for its architectural and historical significance as a commercial town center, distinctive for its association with elite country seats along the easterly side of the Hudson River. The village retains dense, intact commercial and residential streets, distinguished by an unusually large number of stylish 19th century picturesque buildings. This boundary expansion, which you see in red on this map, incorporates 3 additional areas of the village, which each reflect important themes in the village's history and expands the period of significance to 1970. The survey which led to this project did not identify any other potential areas of expansion, so this should be it for Rhinebeck. Next. An additional area of significance, ethnic history, Black, is being added to the nomination to reflect the history of Rhinebeck's Oak Street neighborhood. Laid out in the mid-19th century on the west side of the village, this neighborhood was home to Rhinebeck's African American and Irish American population. The area was a focal point of race, ethnic, economic, and class inequities, which resulted in a derogatory reputation among the local establishment. Nearly all of the homes were built between 1850 and 1900 in simple vernacular styles. The schoolhouse you see on the bottom left is the exception there. Members of this community, which has largely gone unrecognized in village history, played an important role working as laborers in stores and in households in the village. Next. The Platte Avenue neighborhood was an important center of the violet industry within the village during the early 20th century. In 1915, when violet production was still in full swing, plans of house lots were overlaid in the area. Initially, homes in this area were built for major producers, known as Violet Kings, and their workers. By the end of World War II, the greenhouses were cleared and the area was redeveloped with homes for returning veterans and retired farmers. Next. The Mill Street area, which incorporates the village's Legion Park and the National Register listed Astor Home for Children, tidies the boundary to better reflect the gateway to the village and demonstrates changes to the village's built environment to accommodate new commercial needs during the post-war era. It includes picturesque homes, many of which received commercial additions to target automobile travelers, and a gas station built during the expanded period of significance. While seasonal visitors and second homeowners had always been part of the village's history, the automobile enhanced this trend in the village and made shorter weekend visits more accessible. This brought new attention by locals and new residents alike to the village's history and architecture and led to interest in historic preservation later in the century. Next. And that's the Rhinebeck boundary expansion. They did get a Preserve New York grant for survey and for the nomination. The village is the sponsor, and we have a resolution of support from the village board. And I also received a letter of support from one property owner in the Oak Street neighborhood. I've received, I believe, 2 objections. I don't have the names right with me at the moment, but very, very few in this district. Are there any questions?
This is Wint. I think this is a terrific and an important initiative, and I'm especially glad, familiar as I am with Rhinebeck, that the Oak Street area is been included and is as well documented. Probably not easy to document properties and owners and the development like this one. Very good research there. I've been involved in Rhinebeck just about all my life. In 1973, I was involved in nominating, I think, the village's first National Register building, the Delamater House on Route 9, North Montgomery Street. And others carried on and did the main village district in the late 1970s, as you said. On the Platte Avenue part, the violet industry was an enormous boon economically to northern Dutchess County from Poughkeepsie to Red Hook. And it's been described to me, in fact, I think people have made video treatments of it, historical images, these enormous glass houses, all growing one thing, sweet violets, which are tiny plants on raised beds within the greenhouses, and the people picking them, making bunches of them for corsages, would lie on horizontal board frames 6 inches above the plants. How they survive their stiff necks, I can't imagine. Picking the blooms and wiring them or tying them together. And it just ended all of a sudden for reasons that I don't know, in the late 1930s, I think. And that's when the glass houses went away and Platte Avenue was developed. All interesting stories. very well documented in this nomination, and very happy to see Rhinebeck Village pretty much completely, soon very much completely listed on the register. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would move its approval.
Any other comments about Rhinebeck Village Historic District boundary increase? Do I hear a second?
Carol, I'm seconding.
Excellent. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, it's approved by unanimous consent, and we can move to the Mary E. Bell House.
Thank you. The Mary E. Bell House is significant under Criterion A in the area of ethnic history for its association with the Smith and Bell families and the African American community of Center Moriches during the 19th and 20th centuries. Enslaved Africans were brought to Long Island in the earliest stages of the region's settlement, made up a significant portion of Long Island's population by 1799 when New York passed gradual abolition, and faced the challenging task of building new lives after the formal end of slavery in 1827. Next. In Center Moriches, Abraham and Henry Perdue became prominent leaders and landowners within the small Black community. In the decades after they founded the Moriches AME Church in 1847, located very close to where this house was later built, the community and its number of Black landowners grew. Next. Silas Smith moved to Center Moriches, purchased land, and built this home for his family on Railroad Avenue, circa 1872. So on this map, you see his name, S.W. Smith, sort of center top. That's the house, and then the church is just below the others. So there's a small collection of African American families in that area. And further south, on Union Avenue, you see A. Perdue. That's Abraham Perdue, who I mentioned on the previous slide. His brother Henry lived a little further outside of town. It is unknown whether Mr. Smith hired or worked with a local builder to construct the home, or whether he primarily built it himself. But in any case, connections with members of the existing Black community were likely invaluable to the newly arriving family. Next. This shed-roofed wing appears to have been added circa 1880 to allow Selah's wife, Mary Ann, a dedicated space for her work as a laundress. She had been a laundress before they moved to this area. One of the things that's interesting about this building is you see the addition is slightly inset at the rear. It's likely there was a slightly inset porch first, and it was expanded into this more substantial wing later. Next. I love this photograph. This home, which would remain in the family for over a century, provided security, stability, and opportunity to the family. The house and land provided a safe space, the ability to supplement their income with a garden and independent work, and was located close to the AME church that they played an active role in. This wonderful circa 1890 photo depicts either Mary Ann Smith and 4 of her daughters, or the 5 Smith daughters. The woman with the child at the center is Mary E. Bell. Next. Mary E. Bell inherited the house after her father's death. With her husband, Ernest Bell, she raised a family of 4 children in the house and worked as a laundress. These are a couple of interior photographs from the first floor. You see the parlor, and I love this in the middle. We're looking from the parlor into the stair hall into the kitchen. So this stair hall is very narrow. It's a very efficient use of space. Next. And here's the kitchen. Of course, the building has been restored now, so it looks beautiful. Mary E. Bell played a central role in her community and church, and played a critical part in the small congregation's survival. She fostered its transition from the AME, African Methodist Episcopal denomination, to the AMEZ, African Methodist Episcopal Zion denomination, led its Varick Society of Christian Endeavor, and held prayer meetings at her home. After her death in 1923, the congregation renamed itself the Bell AMEZ Church in her honor. Next. And this is inside the laundry addition. Alice Bell, who was born at the house, inherited the property and continued to live there for the rest of her life. Like her mother, she played an important part in the life of the AMEZ congregation and was particularly known for her sweet potato pies. When she died in 1996, legal and tax issues prevented the house from passing to the church as she intended. Next. After the house was threatened with demolition in 2009, community and historic preservation advocates successfully lobbied to have the town designate the house as a historic landmark and take ownership of the property. The Ketchum Inn Foundation, which has a formal stewardship agreement with the town, worked to restore the house, which had its grand opening to the public on June 22nd, 2019. I have several letters of support from this one from Edward Romaine, the town of Brookhaven supervisor, one from Fred Thiele Jr., New York State Assembly, Dr. Georgette Greer-Key, board president of Long Island Historical Societies, and just got one this morning after the meeting had started from Jennifer L. Martin, the chair of the Town of Brookhaven Black History Commission. Are there any questions on the Mary Bell House?
This is Kristen, and I just wanted to say there was so much to appreciate in this nomination. I really wanted to acknowledge the great research into the census records, the discovery of that wonderful image in particular. I thought it was really contextualized so well as part of this broader African American community. The talk about the structure itself, the sort of the construction elements in this vernacular building. And although this is a local story, it just connects so much to a broader New York and American history that I think it's just so important that it is nominated here today. So when we're ready, I'm happy to make that nomination.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen.
Cora, this is Georgette. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for coming on, Georgette.
Yes, I'm like a preservation nerd, so I've just been enjoying myself in all the presentations and the conversations. So I just wanted to thank everyone, Daniel McKay. I heard Jay's on the call, Jennifer's on the call. I want to say hello to everyone. But I wanted to thank Jennifer for an amazing job with this application. She contextualized the history very well. And the last, I think it was Kristen who spoke in regards to this story. Yes, it's a local story, but it's also part of the larger state and national conversation about how African American history is cataloged. And the church is still there and still active, and it's a few steps down. And particularly, I wanted to know that this community and Alice Bell were concerned about preservation. And why I say that is because the change from the church being just a non-affiliate, non-denominational church to the AME Zion shows that they were concerned with the church having oversight and being a part of the future of that community. So that alone also signifies the fact that they were concerned with preservation. As far as the house itself, the Black History Commission, along with Ketchum Inn and Bird Societies, are looking at ways that this property is engaged by the community. We recently had a recording of Mrs. Bell's famous sweet potato pie. As you know, after church services, this is something that they would do is particular come together. And there's a scripture that you always would hear, how sweet and how pleasant it is to dwell with brother and sister. And they did a lot of eating. The stove does work. I actually cooked with Diane on the stove. We cooked from the church's anniversary book, fried chicken with lard. And we also made pies. So the house has such a peace in it when you go in it. There's a lot of reading books. So we have some plans for this house on a town level. But when I tell you the peace that comes over you when you go in this house, when the opening happened, it was like a few of the sisters. And that's another story that I like to bring up. The fact that women were kind of matriarchs in these communities. When a few of the sisters, and that's me there in the yellow dress, I look like an elephant, but that's okay. But when you go into the house, there's such a peace, and automatically when we were walking in for the opening, the sisters started to sing a hymn. All of the ladies, this hymn just came over them. So this is an incredible property, an incredible give back to the community. So I think for her job with staying on this all these years And Long Island has a long way to go, but this does provide some promise for the direction and including African American history and the American story. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? We have a motion from Kristen. Would someone like to second?
It's Carol. I'd like to second.
Excellent. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent. And we can move on to Daniel Boggs and the Chenango Canal Prism.
Thank you.
Can I just ask before we get there, Kristen, how are you on time?
I will have to sign off around 12:30, probably right after the Pink House. I apologize, but I have a MISCA meetings this afternoon.
It seems like we'll get it in while you're here, though.
Yeah, I'll wait till the end of Pink House. I think I can, and I will send a message in chat when I have to depart.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, excellent.
All right, then I'll get right into it. Built between 1834 and 1836 along the west side of the Chenango River as part of New York State's canal system, the 97 miles long Chenango Canal contained 116 locks and, as originally constructed, stretched from Binghamton to Utica through Broome, Chenango, Madison, and Oneida counties. At its northern extreme in Utica, the Chenango Canal intersected with the Erie Canal. At its southern extreme, the canal emptied into the Susquehanna River. The slide shows a map of the entire canal, and below it, on the right there, the portion being considered for the nomination. This section includes Lock 106, Prism, and Towpath, having a period of significance from its construction in 1834 to close of operation in 1878. The Chenango Canal, Lock 106, Prism, and Towpath is significant under Criterion A, Transportation, and Criterion C, Engineering, for retaining distinctive characteristics of construction and design. Its historic and engineering resources, it substantially meets the registration qualifications requirements laid out in the MPDF, the historic and engineering resources of the Chenango Canal.
Palladino and Buffalo.
The photo highlights the ice-filled prism and 10-foot wide towpath in the nominated section, which the property owners have continued to maintain to use for driving livestock. Fencing constructed of wooden posts and wire surrounds the canal prism currently in order to keep livestock from the canal's edge. The well-maintained condition of the towpath serves to increase the visual integrity of the canal prism. Next slide, please. The nominated section extends approximately 1.3 miles, beginning at a 190-acre property in the town of Fenton in Broome County and the town of Greene in Chenango County, and continuing from there northeast into Chenango County. Northeast of the Fenton property, the canal prism and towpath are lost for a short stretch of about 800 feet. There, a breach in the prism wall led to the formation of a pond filled by water emanating from the surrounding hillside. And you can see that in the top of the slide there. Past the pond, the canal continues for an additional 1,600 feet to the northeast within the town of Greene. A berm visible on the east side of that portion of the canal dates to the original canal construction. The berm continues to serve as a barrier between the canal and wetlands beyond. This nomination for this section of the Chenango Canal Prism and Towpath was prepared by SUNY Oneonta students under the guidance of Dr. Cynthia Falk. Next slide, please. It's a view of Lock 106 from the canal looking southwest. Each lock had dry laid walls of hand-cut stone. The walls and floors were covered with planks placed over square pine timbers in order to retain the water. The gates, too, were made of wood, with huge timbers placed on top. While the planks and gates are no longer present, much of the lock's original stonework remains. Next slide. This is the gate location, looking northeast. Recesses in the stonework indicate the position of the former lock gates, while the southwestern recess has deteriorated as the result of hillside erosion. The recess on the northeastern side of the lock remains largely intact. Next slide, please. View northwest of the Basin Depression. Northeast of the lock is a sunken field encompassing an area of approximately 1,500 square feet. This field extends from the canal lock approximately 250 feet east to a land bridge. During the canal's operation, this area, known as a canal mooring or basin, was the site of a widened docking area for boats waiting to enter the lock. Drainage issues were a continual challenge for the Chenango Canal, and this waiting area is now a dry, shallow depression currently used for cultivating hay, and perhaps ironically, in this photo, as a parking space for a boat trailer. Next slide, please. This is a photo of a culvert location, just discernible where marked there. A culvert was constructed in this area to allow water to flow under the canal without affecting water levels within the prison. While the location of the culvert is not visible, there is a breach in the berm at the location of the culvert due to the collapse of the infrastructure below. As a result, water from Tuttle Creek now empties into the canal prison before exiting further south. The approximately 1.3 mile surviving section of the Chenango Canal, Lock 106, prism and towpath that is the subject of this nomination, has defining historically intact features that remain as a testament to the history of New York State's industrial period. These features also preserve an important example of early canal engineering. The surviving prism, towpath, berm, lock, culvert, and basin of the former Chenango Canal deserve to be recognized as an important part of the history of New York State and an integral example of 19th century canal engineering and architecture. I'd like to also mention that we have received a letter of support on behalf of the Susquehanna Heritage Area from Laura Zer, Senior Planner, Broome County Planning and Economic Development. Thank you.
Nicely done, Daniel. It's a great nomination. Any questions or comments? I hear a motion to approve.
Did Cynthia want to speak on behalf of this nomination?
I think she's muted.
We can take care of that.
Yep. Yeah, we'll see if we can unmute Cynthia.
Or Cindy, I think.
Or Cindy Fox, yeah.
Cindy, can you hear us?
Problem.
I can hear you.
Oh.
We can't hear you, though.
Yeah.
Currently there we go. It showed you speaking a second ago, so it was picking up. We couldn't hear you, but the WebEx was picking up sound.
Great. Can you hear me now?
Oh,
yes.
Excellent.
Oh, good. I just want to point out how much of a group effort this was. Kathleen LaFranc was the one who initially brought this property to my attention, and we really benefited from survey work that was funded by the Preservation League, as well as the multiple property listing that Tony had done, and the fact that the lock 107, which is immediately to the south, is already listed on the National Register. And it's located within the state park. So we had a lot of resources to work from. This is a project that Cooperstown graduate program students worked on for 2 years. We were able to visit the site several times, including our last visit was in late February, just before things shut down. And I feel like I should also send a shout out to the New York State Archives, who have digitized so much of the canal information for New York State. And that really allowed us to continue to work remotely on this project. It really is a fantastic resource that's out there, and I think most people would sort of pass it by without knowing about the history of the Chenango Canal.
Thank you. That's great. Other comments? Did we have a motion to approve?
So moved. This
This
is
is-
Erica.
Erica Krieger moves.
And this is Jay, I'll second.
Jay got the second. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent, and we move to the Pink House.
Okay, you're looking at a colorized photo from about 1906, and we'll see this again at the end. This nomination for the Pink House was prepared by Ron Taylor, president of the Allegheny Historical Society, with the assistance of Dr. William Paquette, and covers a period of significance from its construction in 1866 to the passing of the owner in 1908. The Pink House is located in the village of Wellsville, Allegheny County, New York, constructed between 1866 and 1869 as the family home of Edwin B. and Antoinette F. Hall. The Pink House is an architecturally distinguished example of the Italianate style, built to the design of architect Henry Searle of Rochester. The Pink House is significant under Criterion C for architecture and Criterion B as the family home of noted avocational scientist Edwin B. Hall. The central feature of the nominated property is the Italian villa of wood frame construction. It was built on a high stone ashlar foundation to avoid flooding from the nearby Genesee River. The Pink House is an exceptional example of the Italianate style and its towered villa subtype, and one that survives with its distinctive asymmetrical form, profusive exterior wood ornament, and period interior features in a remarkably intact state of preservation. In addition to the dwelling, the property also includes a number of historic period contributing features, among them a drive entryway with flanking statues on pedestals, an ice house, a building known as the Fossil House, a three-story carriage barn, and a gazebo. Next slide. Okay. The driveway entrance is flanked by twin Italian cornucopia statues rising from tall paneled wood bases. The statues are wired and fitted with electric lighting. The house is a private house lived in by 5 generations of the same family since its completion in 1869. The ambiance created by the original family exists today, most obviously notable on the exterior by the eponymous color. The house and other buildings were always painted in shades of pink. Edwin Hall established and managed a successful drugstore in Wellsville, where he mixed and sold paint and naturally made his own paint for the Pink House as needed. Next slide. To the south behind the house, the carriage house is the largest of the property's outbuildings in 3 stories, which can be accessed. It can also be accessed by a side street driveway. The gables and front elevation eaves of the carriage house are trimmed with scroll sawn bargeboard. The same style is present on the Fossil House. Next slide. West of the main house, the Fossil House is a wood frame 1-story building purpose-built by Edwin Hall to house his fossil collection. Inside, the space is divided into 2 rooms. The smaller was used as an office and library, while the larger room was devoted to the display and storage of Edwin Hall's many fossils in custom-made benches with pull-out drawers and a surface viewing area. Those benches remain in place and can be seen in the photo, with peaked removable hoods designed to cover and protect the fossils on the display surface when not being viewed. Edwin Bradford Hall was certified as a pharmacist, but he spent much of his free time in scientific and naturalistic pursuits. He collected fossils intensively and primarily locally, including over 5,500 specimens of fossil sponges prevalent in the Devonian age. After the marriage of his daughter in 1894, Hall allowed his son-in-law to take over the drugstore so he could spend more time with his collections. He then oversaw the construction of the Fossil House to display and store his specimens. He was elected to the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1901, the same year that his collection was given first prize at the Pan American Exhibition at Buffalo. His discovery and naming of several undiscovered fossil species attest to his important contributions to the field of paleontology, even as an amateur. In 1935, Hall's daughter, Fanny Hall Carpenter, donated most of the fossil specimens to the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, where they remain on display. Most recently, in 1996, the remaining portion of Hall's collection was donated to the New York State Museum in Albany by his great-grandson. Next slide. Looking at the Ice House. The Ice House is a two-story wood frame building. When built, the first floor stored ice cut from the Genesee River, which was hauled up through an opening in the second floor to be carried across a now dismantled walkway to the original kitchen. The second floor of the Ice House became a library and playroom when ice was no longer needed for refrigeration. Next slide. Moving into the main house through the front entrance into the foyer, we are immediately struck with the grandeur evident throughout the interior. The principal staircase, fashioned from black walnut and seasoned chestnut, rises to an intermediate landing, in front of which is centered a wall niche that accommodates a statue of a Greek goddess, and the whole is illuminated as needed by a converted gas-lit Cavalier lamp. Next slide. We're looking into what is known as the blue room section of the double parlors. The double parlors to the west of the foyer form the house's principal entertaining space and are the most ornate rooms in the house. Edwin Hall's interest in nature and other subjects are suggested throughout the house, but are on particular display in the double parlor in the form of decorative features. Among them, the birds, seashells, vines, and flowers, such as can be seen in the decorative feature that divides the two halves of the parlor. That feature consists of a wide decorative arch with a central drop pendant in the form suggestive of a hanging flower. Next slide. To the east of the foyer is the family living room, where they gathered for more informal occasions. This room is less ornate than the parlor, but does continue the polished hardwood flooring stained in light amber brown that we see in the parlors, accentuating the natural color of variations in the wood. The theme extends here in quarter round base trim and windows and doors framed with wood casings stained in a similar amber brown. Next slide. Next slide. Adjacent to the living room is the family music room. The central feature of the music room is a round stained glass window with a large painted window below. These depict tropical scenes reminiscent of the prehistoric period. Next slide. Moving up to the second floor hallway sitting room holds a staircase to a third floor tower room. The stained glass and clear glass doors open to permit air circulation from the tower room throughout the second floor, an effect which can be enhanced to cool the house by opening a trapdoor in the tower. These doors open onto balconies on the tower, on the front of the house. The staircase within it rises to the third floor tower room, where there are additional windows opening onto a third floor balcony. Edwin Hall had this third floor balcony reinforced so the entire family could safely observe the nighttime sky. Next slide. The picture in the postcard shown here is the uncolorized version of our first slide. Stamped in November 1906, the card shows the name Pink House in both handwriting and in print, attesting to the continuity of the name. The Pink House is an impressive example of the Italian villa house type, and one that survives with a remarkable degree of integrity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments about the Pink House?
This is Kristen. So this was a super interesting nomination. I really appreciated diving into this one, from the significant architecture to the intact interiors and those decorative links between the fossil collector and interiors. That was really interesting to see. And then, of course, the family stories and the tragedies, just kind of
Yeah.
reading and really in depth. The one question I had is the nomination mentions briefly that much has been made of the color of the house, but do we know why that particular hue was selected out of all the choices? That's like the one question I.
So not really. it, it was a color that was somewhat popular in Italianate styles at that time. But there's no particular, there were family rumors that it was based on houses they had seen in Italy during their honeymoon, but no one knows for sure.
Okay, thank you. I was, imagining things with like the tragedy of the potential first wife. Was it her favorite color? Or so I was just curious. But thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Wayne. I would just like to add that this structure is so distinctive and defining for the community of Wellsville. I enjoyed reading the application. Thank you.
This is Whit. I think the family should be acknowledged and thanked for their continuing commitment to the preservation of this property. It can't be easy, particularly as I understand that they really live somewhere else. And
right.
All credit to them. Thank you. And I'm happy to either move or second the nomination.
And Kristen, I will move or second whatever you guys want to put for the record.
Very well. I'll give Kristen the motion and Wint the second. Ladies before gentlemen. And ask if there's any other comments or objections or abstentions. There being none, we approve by unanimous consent. And I would ask the group if people need a break. 2, 3, 5-minute break? Yes, no?
That would be great.
Yeah, I need one. All right.
Thanks, Doug.
Let's take 5. We'll come 20 minutes to 1. Okay, so there's about 2 minutes left to our 5-minute break. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting back into order. I realize it's dangerous to take a break and we've lost Kristen, I believe, so we want to double check and make sure that we have a quorum. Michael, can you facilitate that?
Yes. I'm going to call the roll of the board members who were present. Doug Pirelli.
Here.
Wint Aldridge. Carol Clark. James, can you see if these people are unmuted? Wint Aldridge.
Yeah, I got it.
Wint, are you present? All right. Not yet. Carol Clark. J. D. Lorenzo. Erica Krieger.
Present.
You. Jennifer Lamack.
I'm here.
Wayne Goodman.
Here.
Lucy Waletsky. Mr. Chairman, so far we only have 4 recorded members. That's not a quorum, so I'll go through the list again.
Thank you, Michael.
Wint Aldridge, are you present?
Oh, it shows Wint trying to talk right now. He's unmuted.
Wint is present online. Carol Clark.
Present.
Thank you. J. D. Lorenzo.
Jay's in the list but not speaking.
Lucy Waletsky.
Lucy is no longer in the participants list, so I believe she's gone.
Oh.
Jay's here.
Excellent. According to the online record, Lucy has left the call. Mr. Chairman, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 members present. That does constitute a quorum.
Excellent. All right, let's start back up again. I apologize to Aaron for taking a break before you are on, and please pick us up with the Hildreth Homestead. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
All right. This is the Hildreth Homestead. It is a 2.4 acre property that contains a residence and barn located in the town of Herkimer County, and is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a representative example of Italianate style, rural domestic architecture that retains many of its period character defining features. Built circa 1860, 2 generations of the Hildreth family lived in the house until 1942. Next slide. The house exterior consists of 4 distinct parts that collectively form an L shape. In the upper left image, the main block is 2 stories and the wing is 1.5 stories. Both have 4 bays and have hipped roofs. The main door hood is decorated with elaborately carved wooden brackets and pendants consistent with an Italianate style. A 1-story porch spans the wing with a corresponding entrance. The porch is supported by 6 lattice work wood posts with an open work diamond pattern. Open work arches filled with a pattern of scrolls and wheels, with the area between the spokes designed to look like hearts, are aligned between the posts. Pediments over the windows on the main block of the house and the wing again reflect a design detail and workmanship of a prosperous farm. The lower right image is the south elevation of the main house, an addition and woodshed, both 1 and 1/2 stories, with front-facing gables in a Greek Revival style. Later changes to the interior have largely obscured the construction chronology of these various parts of the house, but the lack of a basement under the addition and the awkward roof lines connecting it to the wing suggest it was an addition that was moved to its current location. These additions were used for domestic activities such as kitchen and storage. Next slide. The interior showcases many original features, including wood floors, plaster on lath walls, and plaster crown molding. The double parlor features an arch with decorative moldings and brackets dividing the room and paneled wood aprons with raised molding below each window. To the west of the parlor is a modern bathroom and den. A dining room and sunroom are to the south of the entry, and the kitchen is in the addition. On the second floor are 2 bedrooms and a modern bathroom. Next slide. The barn on the property speaks to the agricultural activities of the farm. Together, the house and barn mark the domestic core of the farm, separate from the fields and pastures. The barn is an English style with a timber frame, mortise and tenon joinery, and both hand-hewn and sawn framing components. The main barn contains the threshing floor, animal stalls, and hay loft. As the agricultural practices of the farm changed, additions were added to the north of the main barn and chronicle the evolution of the farm's agricultural activities with 4 different but attached sections. Immediately to the north of the main section are additional animal stalls, then a 2-story tack room and another 2-story addition with stalls on the first floor and chicken coops on the second. Finally, a 1-story chicken coop. This nomination was researched and written primarily by students of Dr. Cynthia Falk. This is the Hildreth Homestead. Are there any questions?
No questions or comments about the Hildreth Homestead? Good nomination, nice interior. Do I hear a motion to approve? Say? Motion to approve.
This is Wayne. I would make the motion.
And it's Erica. I'll do the second.
Great. Any objections or abstentions? Hearing none, this is approved by unanimous consent, and we can move on to the Zion Episcopal Church at Dobbs Ferry. Thank you, Erin.
Okay, so this is the Zion Episcopal Church located in Dobbs Ferry, Westchester County, is being nominated under Criterion C as an architecturally distinguished 19th century ecclesiastical facility in the Hudson Valley. The complex is primarily comprised of 3 contributing buildings: the 1834 church, the 1783 rectory, and the 1888 parish hall. The period of significance encompasses the full development of the church complex over time, starting with the construction of the Zion Episcopal Church in 1833 and terminating with the church's last major addition in 1963. Next slide. The central feature of the complex is the church, the oldest surviving Gothic Revival house of worship in Westchester County, and the oldest extant religious building in Dobbs Ferry. The establishment of this religious organization corresponded with the early 19th century development of Dobbs Ferry, and the church counted a number of notable figures among its membership during that time. Prominent among them, Peter Van Brugge Livingston, Washington Irving, and Alexander Hamilton's sons, James and Alexander Hamilton Jr. By 1850, Zion had outgrown its existing mid-1830s accommodations. The construction of the Croton Aqueduct from 1836 to 1842 and the arrival of the railroad to Dobbs Ferry in 1849 had led to the growth of the village's population. The vestry obtained funds to enlarge the church, and it approved a resolution in April of 1853, resulting in the expansion of the nave to the south and the addition of a tower on the northern facade. Next slide. The vestry began discussing plans for a rectory in 1866, and by the end of July, Zion gained authorization to purchase the former Captain John Smith House on the adjoining lot to the south for use as a rectory. At the time of sale, the wood frame house, dating to 1783, was a two-story building with wood clapboard exterior. With the purchase of the rectory, Zion became a multiple building church complex. By the mid-1870s, the rectory had expanded and was given a mansard roof, giving the building its second empire appearance. By this time, the complex had been formalized through grading the grounds, installing a road on the complex, and constructing a horse barn, now since demolished. At the same time the rectory was expanding, the church had expanded as well to accommodate additional 50 people. Rectangular wings were added to the sides of the nave and to provide space for an organ and for vestry rooms. The existing chancel was replaced with a polygon-shaped version. Next slide. The last major addition to Zion's complex was the parish hall, completed in 1888. The congregation had long expressed the need for a space for Sunday school and meetings. Designed in a late Gothic revival style, the cross-gabled parish hall references the church's pointed arched openings and rough-faced ashlar masonry in a sophisticated manner. Next slide. Zion has remained a progressive congregation and an important community organization throughout its history. In 1977, in recognition of its architectural and cultural significance in Dobbs Ferry, Zion was listed as a historic landmark of Westchester County. Today, the church continues to be a vibrant presence in Dobbs Ferry. This project was brought to us through a partnership with Columbia University and Sacred Sites, and that's the Zion Episcopal Church. Any questions?
Questions or comments about Zion?
It's Carol. I wanted to comment on the cultural significance that Chelsea pointed out, given the early congregants that were mentioned. And I'd be happy to move the item when that's the appropriate thing to do.
Excellent. Go ahead.
I'm happy to second. It's Jay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve. Are there any objections or abstentions? All right, this is approved by unanimous consent without objection or abstention. And we can move to Dan Bagro and the Ovalwood Dish Factory at Tupper Lake.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The early 20th century Ovalwood Dish Factory Historic District is located in the village of Tupper Lake, Franklin County, and is being nominated in association with Criterion A and C at the local significance level, with a period of significance from 1916 to 1967. Next slide, please. The factory is located on the east side of Deemers Boulevard, facing Racket Pond, and comprises the surviving industrial works used for wood manufacturing for roughly 50 years. The property includes the main factory, boiler house, sawmill, power plant with attached smokestack, factory office, water tower, and the warehouse foundation. Next slide, please. Most of the construction occurred during a single episode from 1916 to 1918, with the most significant addition to the factory complex being the water tower erected at some point between 1927 and 1934. All of the resources contribute to the significance of the historic district, with the exception of Building 2, which was built after 1979, and that is the boiler house. The primary materials used in construction of the buildings are poured in place reinforced concrete, steel, and wood. While the complex has lost its original warehouse and the tramways that once connected the warehouse to the rest of the buildings, as well as a few smaller auxiliary buildings, overall the factory retains integrity and is able to convey its significance. Next slide, please. The Oval Wood Dish Company, founded in 1884 in Ohio, is significant under Criterion A in the area of industry for the property's association with the single-use hardwood bowl and cutlery industry, a vital 20th century manufacturer in the village of Tupper Lake and New York's Adirondack region. The company's original product was one of the earliest forms of mass-produced disposable dishware, a shallow wooden dish carved from a single piece of wood and designed for single use by butchers and grocers selling ground meat, butter, lard, and other messy grocery goods. By the time the Tupper Lake factory was opened in the early 20th century, the manufacture of bowls had evolved into thin pieces of hardwood veneer stapled at the ends into an oval dish shape. The factory would expand their offerings to also include clothespins and bowling pins and was reputed to be the largest industrial plant ever built in Franklin County. Next slide, please. The property is also significant under Criterion C as a representative example of a largely intact reinforced concrete industrial complex built in the early 20th century. Building 1 in particular is an excellent example of a poured-in-place reinforced concrete daylight factory. Next slide, please. The period of significance for the historic district begins with the construction of the factory complex in 1916 and ends with the burning of the warehouse in 1967, which was the catalyst for the decline of the factory complex's economic significance to the community. The Oval Wood Dish Factory Historic District is not only an excellent example of early 20th century industrial design, but it's also a significant reminder that thoughtful industry saved Tupper Lake from being a quote-unquote sawdust town. By bringing industry to the wood rather than wood to the industry, the Oval Wood Dish Company offered economic security to a rural community that was facing eventual abandonment like many of its regional neighbors. Next slide, please. The company's social contributions to Tupper Lake ranged from providing workers with good wages, housing, and recreation to promoting the development of healthcare and tourism in a region where the jobs from lumber would one day end. Employees could enjoy various entertainment and sports in the recreation building that faced Deemers Boulevard. This wing of the factory building, Section M of Building 1, had a gallery overlooking a large multi-purpose space that was used as an auditorium and as a playing field. Basketball and baseball leagues held regular games here during the 1920s and 30s, with opponents hailing from around the region. The factory property was eventually sold in 1964 to a plywood company, but the 1967 warehouse fire marked the decline of the factory's economic significance. Building 1 changed hands a number of times in the later 20th century and is currently not in use. Next slide, please. The Oval Wood Dish Factory Historic District is an excellent representative example of an early 20th century industrial complex in New York's Adirondack region that documents the full history of an important local and regional woodworking industry. The Oval Wood Dish Factory is pursuing nominations so they may proceed with a certified rehabilitation, and we've received letters of support from the mayor of the village of Tupper Lake and the chairman of the Joint Town Village Planning Board. This nomination was researched and written by Andrea Zlotucha-Kozub, and in addition to the 2 letters of support, Andrea asked me to mention that there is a great deal of local support for the nomination and rehabilitation. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments?
This is Wint. I'm perhaps more familiar than most of the board with the the scenery of the Adirondacks and its historical functioning. And this has been one of the more remarkable buildings, very accessible from a state highway. And I've always wondered what in the world was an oval dish. And I now know what an oval dish is. I mean, it was originally a wooden dish. I figured that you couldn't make it on a lathe because it's oval and not round. But by the time the company started up in Tupper Lake, as you just heard, they were stapling veneer, and then moved on. So imaginative in finding uses for their material to tongue depressors, bowling pins, clothes pins, popsicle sticks. Don't you love it? And they knew that it couldn't last forever, and they told the community that, and indeed, the 50 years that they estimated proved to be the case. But it is interesting. There aren't that many manufacturing enterprises leaving behind major buildings. Certainly in Tahawas, the National Lead people, their factories are still there. But in the central Adirondacks, there aren't more than 2 or 3 or 4 of them. And this is one of the most visible. And I think it's terrific that that there are new uses for these buildings being imagined, and that we can be of some assistance in that. Very nice project, and I'm happy to move its approval.
I'm happy to know what OWD stands for, since I've driven by that smokestack 100 times in my life and often wondered about that. It must be wonderful for the local community to have renewed interest in some kind of rehabilitation of this massive complex.
And the fact that the stack is over 200 feet high, I didn't realize that. Whether they needed that to get the draft, or whether they were really being good about not polluting the village neighborhood, I don't know, but remarkable.
Indeed.
Wint, this is Daniel. In that litany of products that you mentioned, you were getting close with popsicle sticks, but you neglected to mention the Hoodsey spoon, which is that little flat wooden spoon that came with Hoodsey cups, and I think that deserves a special shout out.
Yes, in fact, this is
I
Erica.
probably should have mentioned that. I did mention the cutlery, but the wooden spoons that they made were also rather ubiquitous.
This is Erica. I was going to bring that up, as this might be the first application that probably every single board member has used a product related to this building, at least.
Oh, it's so true.
Yeah.
So, Wint, did you move?
Yes, I did.
I'll second.
Do we have a second?
Yep, Erica.
Excellent. Any objections or abstentions? All right, approved by unanimous consent without objection or abstention. Moving to Greenwich.
Thank you. The Greenwich District School number 11 is being nominated in association with criterion A and C at the local significance level, with a period of significance from 1850 to circa 1944. Greenwich District School number 11 is a rural one-room educational building located at the intersection of Ryan Road and State Route 29 in the town of Greenwich, Washington County. Next slide, please. The immediate setting is characterized by open expanses of tilled agricultural land interspersed with woodland and framed in the distance by wooded hills. Next slide, please. The schoolhouse consists of 2 sections constructed during separate building campaigns. The main block was constructed in 1850 and a rear wing was added in 1927. The 1850 section was of the characteristic rural one-room school type and was erected with load-bearing brick walls, interior sawn and hewn framing, and plaster and wood finishes. It was modified with the addition of the rear frame wing in 1927, which accommodated new restrooms and at which time alterations were also made to the original construct to bring the building up to current educational standards. The school functioned continuously as an educational facility for those Greenwich town children who resided near the mill hamlet of Center Falls alongside the Battenkill River, and it remained in service until school consolidation and centralization occurred in the town in the mid-1940s. Next slide, please. The former school is a characteristic example of the one-room rural school type built on straightforward terms and lacking any significant pretense to architectural style outside of features which affiliate it in modest terms with the Greek Revival style. It is an amalgam of the original mid-19th century construct and the 1927 rehabilitation effort, which was meant to address what were then deemed deficiencies in its design. It survives in large measure with its principal exterior and interior character-defining features intact, aside from the loss of fiberboard wall and ceiling surfaces, which were installed in 1927, and the removal of a chimney which once serviced a stove within. The 1927 modifications, which centered on bathroom upgrades, other interior modifications, and increased playground space and ready access to it, are representative of the sweeping changes which had occurred in school design in New York from the time the building was erected in 1850. From the late 19th century to the 1910s, educators and architects who specialized in school design increasingly focused on matters of sanitation, hygiene, lighting, and proper means of ventilation. These advances were codified either through legislation or the standardization of best practices. Next slide, please. Greenwich District School Number 11 is being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of education as a salient reminder of Greenwich's former district school system. It is additionally being nominated in association with Criterion C in the area of architecture as an example of the rural one-room schoolhouse type as built in Washington County in the mid-19th century, and in this instance as an example of brick masonry construction. Following the closure of the school in the 1940s, the building is believed to have remained vacant and unused until it was purchased in 2017. It has recently undergone a certified rehabilitation to allow for its reuse, and the photos presented here reflect those rehabilitation efforts. This nomination was researched and written by William Krattinger. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions or comments?
Questions or comments about the Greenwich District School Number 11? I have a motion to approve.
This is Wayne. I'll make that motion.
Jennifer.
And Jennifer second. Wayne first, Jennifer second, if that's okay.
Sure.
Sure.
Any objections or abstentions? All right, we are approving by unanimous consent without objection or abstention with the 7 board members present. Is this the last nomination?
Yep. Go ahead.
Doug, I just wanted to give the owner an opportunity to speak.
Absolutely, absolutely. My apologies.
Mrs. Schultz?
I spoke with her earlier, and she mentioned that she'd be listening in, but did not have an intention to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next nomination, this is for discussion only today by the board. It's the Yaphank Main Street Historic District. Jennifer has a few points she wanted to go over, but again, just a reminder to everyone on the line that this is for discussion purposes only for the board members to discuss at this time. So Jennifer, if you want to take it away?
I will. So I'm sorry that I'm not presenting this nomination to you today. I was asked to give a little bit of information about this project, which was pulled from consideration and is just for discussion here today by the board. So the Yaphank Main Street Historic District was sponsored by the Yaphank Historical Society, and they've been active in the community for years and directly associated with several prominent restoration projects in the community, some of which you see there on the screen. So they've been planning this district for some time. I met with them first several years ago, and they've engaged in outreach, obtained a Preservation League grant for survey and NR work, and Zachary Studenroth, who you may be familiar with, was the consultant on the nomination. So early on, an owner in the district who objected sent in his objection letters, created an objection template, and then went through the neighborhood soliciting objections from other people in the district. So as of today, we have 78 of 115 owners objecting. That comes to 67%. There were several challenges here, including the inability to have an in-person public meeting right now. That might have helped, it might not have helped. I did create a recorded presentation that was posted online on July 1st. The YouTube link was in the letters that were sent out to everyone, and it has had over 80 views at this point. And we've not had any letters returned for this district, so we do believe that owners did receive them. The sponsor plans to do more outreach, attempts to combat misinformation, and hopes to bring this nomination back to you when there's demonstrated support for the district. Happy to entertain any questions people may have. I know this draft was sent out days before we got a large number of objection letters, so you may have had a chance to look at it.
What is the source of the objections? I mean, what are they objecting to? Just the listing and the fear that they won't be able to modify their properties as they wish?
That's the assumption. The form letter that was used for these objections just says that they oppose the district. And we don't know what the person who solicited these objections told people when he went door to door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's unfortunate.
Jennifer, would it be useful when COVID allows us to do it to share the draft nomination with some of these people? Because I think it's tremendously impressive. And one of the things that I particularly like about it, and I don't remember seeing this in another nomination, is this inclusion of research questions for future consideration. That's very nice, sort of forward-looking. That may be alarming to the property owners, I suppose, but just in terms of an academic or educational exercise, very nice. I would hope that all the good work that Zachary has done and the Historical Society has done will not languish, but be shared with those who are concerned about this and need to be enlightened. Thanks.
I know that they plan to do some outreach and perhaps sharing the nomination will be part of that. That the research questions are actually a requirement of the archaeology consideration, which we don't see very often, and was a special feature of this district. I don't know what specific plans the Historical Society may have for outreach at this time, but they do have a goal of getting notarized letters rescinding enough of those objections that they can bring it back. So we'll see.
Yeah, this is Kathy. One of the things that we're going to do, Jennifer and I are going to get together early next week and probably come up with some sort of a draft letter to inform all of the property owners sort of, the situation and, if they have any outstanding questions, what kind of further outreach and questions we can answer for them. But we do feel it's important to follow up subsequent to today's meeting to let them know, that we hope to be able to answer any questions and maybe we can do more outreach in the community.
Carol, and I'm glad to hear that, Kathy, because this is obviously a meritorious nomination, and it's a pity that we can't act on it, and it's probably misinformation that's, causing the problem. I was a classmate of Zachary Studenroth in graduate school, I can say, and he's always done great work, so it continues. Good luck with your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I just saw a question about the pink house in the chat box. Is somebody addressing the questions that are coming in?
I have that.
James Carter, is answering.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing that.
No question was, but I saw it pop up. Yeah. Is there anything else that we can answer? Any other concerns, questions from the board?
I'm just curious as to how common it would be to share the nomination and how effective you think that might be, because I think it might go a long way.
Yeah, it is. Actually, it is posted. I mean, and maybe that's one of the things we can do when we send.
It's not posted online, actually. I had checked. For some reason, it wasn't included with nominations.
That's right. We held off. Well, we can post it now. We can certainly, yeah, I held off since we weren't voting on it today. But certainly we could, you know, put it out there on the website at this point then. And when we send a letter out to the property owners, they could link to it, to our website. Maybe we should do that. That would be a good way of getting the wonderful history out to them.
Well, I know the board supports this and wants to help out in any way that we can. So if you'd like people to read the letter and comment on that or offer any suggestions that we can, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that closes. Now that is the last nomination for discussion, correct? We are not talking about the Nicholas Park in Spencer, Tioga County. I'm looking at an old list, obviously.
Yeah, that one we are postponing. That came in fairly late, and it's a really interesting baseball history and recreational history, but we're hoping to get that one, move that one forward to the December meeting.
All right.
That just needed a little bit more polishing and research, so. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay,
Doug,
that takes care of
Doug, this is Daniel McKay, if I might add. I skipped over an item in my first of meeting report that I think is worth noting and perhaps ends the meeting on a slightly more positive note. And that is that in conjunction with the Landmark Society of Western New York, the State Preservation Office has secured a $750,000 grant from the National Park Service to undertake a program of encouraging and advancing building rehabilitation in the Genesee Valley corridor, basically south of Rochester down through Letchworth State Park, down to Cuba, New York. There's a string of communities in the Genesee Valley there that this grant will allow us to work with them to advance historic preservation projects in those communities. And we're happy to partner with Landmark Society of Western New York to do so. And I want to give a particular shout out to Dan McEnany, who heads the Community Engagement Unit, and Fran Stern, who actually did the grant writing that secured that funding. So very, very nice news for the agency amidst some tougher fiscal times.
Excellent.
Daniel, this is Wayne. I just wanted to basically echo, I think, your spot on comments about how exciting it is to obtain this funding. I can tell you that our organization is thrilled. We celebrated, I think, the whole day when we got word of the grant. And I would also just like to thank Fran and to thank Dan. There were a couple of last minute tweaks in the application. I know the two of them did a fantastic job getting it ready. And just on our staff, I'd like to acknowledge Caitlin Mivas, who also worked with them to get it completed. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it, and we're excited.
Great. Thanks, Wayne. I believe there are some new and or old business items that Michael is going to introduce next on the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. When Chuck Vandry sent me the last minute email that he was unable to join the meeting today, he provided this explanation, which is an update on work that he's reported on in previous meetings. He has been working with the State Museum to recover the remains of U.S. Army personnel who died in the 1776 military hospital at Fort George in Lake George. You might remember he discussed this previously. These were disturbed by construction early in 2019, and the goal has been to leave no one behind by recovering as much of the remains as possible. The developer has announced that next week, now that the summer tourist season is over in Lake George, he intends to start up work on the site again that may impact an area that still contains unrecovered remains. So Chuck and his team are on site this week. The work may take an additional 2 to 3 days, and they're committed to making sure that the archaeology gets done before the backhoes become active again. So that's where he is this week instead of on our meeting. And in sad news, every awards program always has an in memoriam section where they note the passing of people related to whatever that industry is. And Since the June meeting, there has been two significant losses. First and foremost, Paul and Mary Liz Stewart lost their son Daniel to a motorcycle accident in Forest Grove, Oregon on July 12th. And Paul is not on the call today because they are still grieving that loss and dealing with the fact that COVID prevents so much of the public grieving that would normally occur. It might be appropriate for the board to resolve condolences to Paul and Mary Liz. I leave that to the board. The other passing is Gene Norman, who served as chair of the New York City Landmark Preservation Commission from 1983 to 1988. Died recently, August 30th, at his home in the Bronx. He was 85. Those of us who have been involved in preservation in New York State and New York City in particular know that Mr. Norman, who was an architect, graduated from the Pratt Institute, was instrumental in the designation and protection of the Broadway theaters that were threatened. St. Bartholomew's Church, which was threatened with the construction of a very high office building on the site of their parish house, and even the Coney Island cyclone. He also helped defeat the state legislation that would have exempted religious institutions from landmark designation. That grew out of that effort on the part of the opponents of designation, grew out of the battle over St. Bartholomew's Church, and without that victory in the state legislature, we would no longer be designating religious properties, nor would they be eligible for our preservation grants. So those are two in memoriam since the June meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael, this is Carol and everyone else. Gene Norman was absolutely the most endearing man and leaves a great legacy in terms of the work that he was able to accomplish when he was chair of the Landmarks Preservation Commission here in New York City.
Thank you. Do we want to make a board resolution regarding Paul and Mary Liz Stewart's loss? And I'm just not sure how to handle this. I'm open to suggestions. I don't know if we want to just leave it in the minutes or write a letter, or I'm not sure how to respond.
Mr. Chairman, in the past, the board has sometimes passed a resolution honoring somebody who's retired from the board or something like that. So the idea of a resolution would require a motion and a second but then we can draft the resolution and share it with the individuals at the request of the board.
It's Carol. I would say we should do that.
Yeah, I agree. So Carol moves, I'll second. Are there any objections or abstentions from that?
No.
All right. So it is resolved that we will acknowledge that. Would somebody volunteer to draft a resolution that we can review and present at a future date? All right, I'll do that if no one else wants to take a crack at it. I might have tried to elicit Wynn's help in that. All right. Any other action required on that?
Not on that, Mr. Chairman.
Do I hear any new business from any board members? Barring that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Carol.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Meeting is adjourned at 1:22.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone for their great work and their input.